Okay, we're live.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And welcome to this special meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council. Today, we're going to be discussing our favorite topic, the 2023-24 budget. And we acknowledge as we do that we are gathered today in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This morning, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. We have this session being streamed on YouTube, so the folks at home can watch the proceedings and can listen to our discussions. And when the session is finished, they will have an opportunity to ask questions of council on the topic that we are discussing this morning. Council, you have an agenda that was emailed to you. What is your wish?
Move we accept the agenda as circulated.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Moniz Croft. On the motion, on the question, all in favor, motion's carried. Let's go to item number 1 on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we're continuing our budget discussions. Obviously, we left off last time in the middle of reviewing line by line through the capital budget. So that was, we were using the detailed 10-year summary. So that's page 111 on the document. I think we decided last time it was easier for people to follow on their own screen rather than sharing. I'm happy to share it, but it's kind of up to folks here. So we had gotten as far as the recreation and culture section. I guess I should note that last meeting we were joined for the part of the meeting that we devoted to reviewing the capital budget with our manager of public works and transportation. So Jonathan is here again today, just for the first part of the meeting. He's got some other things to take care of today, of course. So, but we thought especially with the recreation and culture section, if anyone has questions about these projects, and then I might, when we get down into the utilities, then we may let Jonathan off the hook because those are not his projects in any case. So just before we kind of jump right back into that review of capital, 2 things I want to say. One is the progress so far with respect to the budget. We were just discussing as the meeting was getting started that we're working from the previous version of the budget. There were some decisions made at the last meeting. After this meeting, those decisions and the ones from this meeting will be incorporated into a further revision. Our discussion this morning, we're hoping to finish reviewing capital, and then the recommendation from staff would be that we move into discussion of grants. And then you'll notice that there is a closed session included here, and there was an intention for that closed session to give us an opportunity to review certain items of the budget in confidence, so particularly with respect to personnel. And I actually have one capital project that is active. We've gone out to tender, so I would just like to briefly talk about that as well. So that's what we're hoping to cover this morning. We'll see how far we get, if that sits well with everyone around the table. And I'm presuming it does. And the other thing I was going to say is just a reminder that the descriptions on the capital detail, anything in the current year is the highlighted red text column for 23-24. You'll also see some actuals for the prior year and then the following 10 years. The descriptions of the projects here, some of them do cut off, as was noted last time. If it's a project that is in the current year in 23-24, then that description is provided also on the current year detailed budget, which precedes this in the document. So you can go back there and see the full description. It's just a space constraint on this spreadsheet that the descriptions, some of them couldn't fit. So just wanted to note that because it was raised last time. So are councillors comfortable to jump into that review where we left off last time. Any concerns before we do? All right. Recreation and culture starts at number 54 on the list. There were 3 projects that were undertaken last year, and I guess I don't quite want to say complete. The flagpole's fully complete. That's done. That's totally done. With respect to the sports field improvement, you will notice a couple of things on this list. Well, I think only one thing on this list that specifically does relate to that project. So essentially, there's the work that was scoped last year, we reported on in early March, was completed successfully with the external funding and in cooperation with Mahone Bay United. But now there's just a couple of things in order to really say that you feel that that project is complete. And we'll get to that as we get down. And Edgewater beautification is similar. You'll actually see the way we reflected that one is the same project showing $6,000 in the current year. And that's just coming back to finish the painting. We did have external funding. It was capped at 50% of 50,000. So the external funding's been expended. We've done a final report. They're good. That's all taken care of. But we did mean to after, and Jonathan comment on the questions, but give the wood an appropriate amount of time to weather before coming back to paint it white. And the white paint was the traditional look of the fence. That's what we're planning to do this year. So that would still be capitalized, I think, and from Ashley's perspective, we put it here, but if we hadn't just done the fence, painting wouldn't be capitalized. So I'm just trying to provide that in context for folks. Does anyone have any questions on those? So the next,
About that painting.
Yeah.
Dylan, for some reason, I thought that the original capital, which I think was in the $45,000 range, included the painting.
We did originally expect to get the painting done in the same $50,000 grant, and actually what we had done, I don't want to bring it too much of an open session here, but we had a tender and we'd awarded it and it was at a lower price. And unfortunately that contractor backed away. We had to go to the next one. So we did come up just slightly in the cost expectations there. So that's why it's just a little bit over the original budget at this point.
We also did the sign and the pillars.
Yes, yeah, we
Wasn't
included
part of the original scope.
part of why we did that, and it's a good point, Joe, is in order to do that work within the year to get to our 50,000. What we could have done theoretically, if the painting could have been done last year, that would have been it. And then this year we're becoming and saying, can we do the gate for 5,000? So yeah, good point, Joe. That was how we wanted to use the money. It was on the table. So.
I thought when we discussed the original people that it called for a white fence, that would have, to me, included the white paint.
So the problem, you're right, we did. And the problem we found when we did that was that, the contractors themselves pointing out, like, we can't, like, yes, you want us to provide a quote for painting pressure treated wood, but we'd have to have started that a year before, or, you know what I mean? So that we actually said, let's exclude the paint, we'll get that separately contracted.
So that was a lower thing.
Yeah, but so that's where Joe's point about, like, so if we did bring it down by 5,000, then we added back in the gate and the signage in order to come up above the $50,000 that we had originally quoted. John, do you want to add to this?
So yeah, especially with a project that started late in the season and within the time of the season. And we recognize with the contract that, like Dylan says, that couldn't have time to paint it before winter hit. So we do have to even have the paint for the project sitting in the stores. So it doesn't matter applying the paint. It's kind of all had the project. It just took the late build.
So the next one we've got waste receptacle. I just wanted to note part of the 10-year context here is that we put down waste receptacles every 2 years as a recurring expense. And essentially, the waste receptacles are only technically, I think, probably good for 2 years, 3 years. It's one of those items that the advertising. I mean, I guess you get the ones from ABCO; those are a little bit longer, but generally, waste receptacles are treated as a real short-term asset. So we're assuming that we're occasionally replacing them, we're occasionally adding them anywhere where there's a new seating area, especially with picnic tables. It's easier to have another garbage receptacle than to have people just throwing their stuff on the ground, and then we'd have to clean it up anyway. So this year we do expect probably to add at least one additional garbage receptacle. So we've been adding some seating, or we plan to be adding some seating around the fields at the adjacent to the center, so like in the orchard area on the side there. If we do get picnic table donations, then the town would add another garbage receptacle in that location. And we also keep adding dog waste and cigarette butt receptacles basically based on complaints. So if we get complaints that there's dog waste, or we'll put one in that area rather than have to be a cleanup. So it's just a recurring item. It's not like we're going to go find a certain amount to do this year. But the reason this year was a little bit higher is because we actually haven't done that in the last year. So we're just kind of making sure we have enough budget. We'll only do what makes sense to do. We're not just going to buy a bunch of waste receptacles.
Will there be one next to the bleachers?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I don't know how many, but like presumably there'll need to be a few more up at the center, like adjacent to the center. Jonathan will have to, figure out the details and which kinds are appropriate. And I don't think we'll go with the like $4,000 Abco model in those locations, but it depends on where they are, what's going to be the more appropriate type of receptacle. The next one on the list is the bandstand. This has been on here for a couple of years now. Essentially, we did the Centennial Bandstand project. We've got a lot of external funding, and we renovated the building, the structure itself, and added some accessibility features, bleachers, and that was all great. But we also got some donations and some feedback from performers, and our thought was we would leverage those donations to do some further small improvement to the bandstand. There's a particular funding we did apply for one fund to do that, and we were not successful. There's another funding program that we've been looking at, and hopefully we're just a little short staffed in admin. We were planning to have an application in by now, but if we can get one in shortly, we could have work done for next season. And basically that's, you have to substantiate that it's used by professional performers. So the last couple of seasons we've had now the Mahone Bay Music Association putting on professional series, that's typically qualified. So what we're trying to do is leverage the 5,000 in donations that we have to get a $20,000 project to make small improvements to the bandstand, including, weather and shade screening, some more integrated lighting, things like that. So we got some feedback, and then signage to appropriately designate the name, the memorial there. And there's been a lot of requests for like a better way to display the organizations and their upcoming events. So we'll find a good way to do that. We don't have a perfect solution, but we'll see if we get the money first, because if we leverage the donations and get 75% federal funding, then we're not actually spending anything for these improvements. So that's the plan. It's in the current year because I need to demonstrate the approval of it to get the funding. But I just wanted to say it's depending on how long the funding takes to turn around. We may not complete everything this year. It may drag into the spring a little bit. It just depends on how long it takes to find everything funding.
I noticed last night when we went into the fire hall, and there were bird droppings from the little gazebo, and I just wondered, are bird droppings a problem in at the bandstand?
There's bird netting, Jonathan.
Used to be a huge problem, and I think you said at a meeting, I brought it up because like it really needs to be hosed down between, like just before someone uses it, who's doing a rental. But I think you said when they did replace some things, they did put some kind of material that discouraged bird.
Jonathan, how do you find it these days? Do you guys have to clean it?
Well, actually, we're just there this morning because we moved the bleachers. It seemed like it was pretty clean this morning compared to what you noted up to the fire hall, which we've addressed these as well. There's kind of spikes.
But isn't there a netting that you can use to keep the birds out?
Out or from perching on that ledge, either way.
So it has that.
Oh, it already has that, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, that's what I wanted to know. So
Dylan, so the way you described that project sounds great to me. I take it there are several examples throughout the deck where we've got the placeholder for 100% of the project cost, but in the fullness of time, it may smooth into next year. We may have a complimentary grant. There may be a provincial match. We just don't have all that woven into the storyboard yet.
So that I should have actually said, though, in terms of the detail on the current year, if you flip back to the preceding pages where they're actually all broken out,
Right.
anything in 23-24 does show the breakdown. So this actually shows 5,000 town, 15,000 external. We're looking at a particular funding source. That is all shown. it's only shown for the current, like 23, 24. But this doesn't show the breakdown. It was basically because we've already got 12 columns and we'd be at 22 columns.
Yeah, I know.
So,
So you're showing the gross, not the net.
yeah,
Okay.
but you do get the net on, and what goes into
On the
the,
detail.
the projections for debt levels and everything.
Okay,
That is the net, that's already included.
Okay.
And that's why we do it for the current year, because we wouldn't want to accidentally make it look like we were planning to spend $20,000 on this project, for example. And then the next one is, the reason I'm going through these in a little bit more depth here, is just because they are more, take a little more explanation than like resurfacing a section of street. So I just want to make sure everybody knows what they actually refer to. So Aquatic Gardens entrances, and it's yes, it's in brackets there, because we only really have one right now. This was really only the budget for doing signage and small access improvements, so this wasn't going to include, and I just want everybody to understand what we had talked about with the Quinlan, like if we ever went ahead with that, and we'd have to involve the neighbors, and that would be a larger project. And I don't know about, you know, any possibility on anything with the other direction. Like if there's small stuff we could do with this, we would. But the reason it's entrance and the other brackets is because the entrance off Claremont, we have had a plan for some time now to put some new signage there. You'll notice that there's a bike rack there now. So that improvement around the entrance to the across the bridge from Claremont probably won't come to $10,000. But if we within this had the opportunity to do a little bit of signage in respect of the entrance over on this side, or, you know, so the basic idea here is we've talked a lot about some improvements with respect to the entrances. This is not a large budget. This is more the chamber and the town have basically, I think, agreed to.
you're not
do some
widening the
signage.
bridge.
We're not widening the bridge. We're not adding a new boardwalk around the Quinlan side. Yeah.
So if this money were not spent this year, it would carry over into the next year?
So this is a capital revenue now. That's like most of these, pursuant to our conversation 2 meetings ago. So it would generate a surplus in the current year. And then council will discuss, as we always do at year end, that the surplus would normally go into operating reserve. But so it does become reserve, but as opposed to the ones that are budgeted to come out of capital reserve, the difference there is they just wouldn't come out and then the money would stay in capital reserve. So that's the only difference. So the next one, Sportsville barrier. So this is what I was talking about, you know, things that were left unfinished. We had to ensure that no one could get on the field, especially with vehicles after the work was done and resurfaced. It would have been a real shame. So right away, we put Jersey barriers in there. That's not something that we would recommend as a long term. And I know that the center and Bombay Bay United also feel it's the aesthetic is not, you know, really what a permanent barrier there, but there is a desire to have, you know, at least a notional barrier. Like if someone's hell bent on driving a truck through it, we're probably talking, our suggestion would be more similar to the bollards with a rope between them kind of thing, as opposed to the, you know, physical concrete barriers that are there now. And we actually will relocate the Jersey barriers. They can be used by Public Works and other locations as needed. That's the whole thing with them. They're usable. We bought them. They're usable, movable. And actually, we want to add just a couple to the parking area at the foot of Long Hill. And we've been talking with the Trail Association and the residents there. And we feel that we should relocate a couple of them there to just slightly change the access to the parking area. So, and there will be other places where we would use them. So this proposal is to put in a permanent barrier at the sports field. And I believe, Jonathan, even though this was kind of, we hadn't gotten a hand or anything, probably be on both the parking, like where the parking spaces, so people don't pull any further in than where that is. And then also on the Fairmont side where the field is open, or was this just in front of the parking?
Just in front, just pretty much replace the Jersey barriers that we placed.
Okay. So, and that might be a discussion, like it's, you know, we'd be going out and getting quotes for something. But yeah, so at a minimum, along the parking area.
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions about that as a? So it's another capital revenue project.
So this is just along with the parking area,
I guess at a minimum, that's what we're planning.
bringing up the other areas, because on the other side of the field, vehicles could still drive in that way. Would we use one of those barriers there, maybe prevent vehicles from getting in from
backside. So I mean, I tend to think doing the whole, like both sides would be a good idea. And if everyone's agreeable, like, I don't know, this is plus or minus 12,000. I mean, we'll go out, maybe it's 14, maybe it's 9. I mean, you know. So if everybody here feels like, let's support the notion of going out for both sides, because I do think there's a practical value in having it on both sides.
Dylan, I'm sorry, Joe.
I'm getting a price by the foot, so you can always add extra, and there's a lot of places on the field that you can access when you want to in a truck. Just gotta make sure it's, you know, accessible by emergency services.
Dylan, just one of the outcomes from last evening, look, I do believe there's a real virtue in being able to denote the intended zoning change. So some kind of a demarc point around the field, which will become recreation versus the rest of the property, which there was some confusion last night about whether the rest of the property was going to become protected. What was, I can't remember what the vernacular was, but like Jubilee Woods, I know, conservation, pardon me, so not trying to fry that fish right now,
Yeah.
but just on the field and where we say, like, where is the demarc point? And having it denoted, I think would be wise. Having that done sooner rather than later, I think would be a smart thing to do.
So, yeah, I'm going to comment on that. So as far as that end of the field goes, I think signage would be the only consideration, because if you go there physically, it's very clearly demarked in that you have the end of the actual place there. You now have the trail, the track, and then there's a French drain there that drops off with crushed stone in it.
This is on
And
the
then
other
an
side of
absolute
this.
wall of not well-maintained, naturally overgrown trees that is almost impenetrable on that side. The
Okay,
only real access there is where the trail that runs through to the Beta Bay Trail comes in. And putting some signage there denoting that you're at the sports field is that's a simple thing. We should probably do that. I don't think there is any currently. So, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend a barrier on that side, because at least unless and I think we should eventually look at the health of that forest, but as long as it is what it is, there's no way anyone's coming through it right now.
okay.
So I'm surprised that it's 12,000 just for the parking area side.
It is.
Sounds quite steep.
It is, especially the posts that they use, are very hard to source. Actually, that's the last time the gentleman yesterday, let's do the job. Not that they want it when we get it, but it's quite a bit of work to get them level and get them buried in the ground, and to act like a true bollard
Yeah.
that actually protects and not them just.
Right, that's good plan.
And the other thing would be like,
That's a safe number for that area. I mean,
if you did sauna tube mounted like metal type bollards, I think you'd be even more
Way more.
expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get the quotes in, and I mean, obviously we're gonna approve budget, so it's way off the budget. We'll be back to talk to you folks about it, but if this gets approved, then we'll be able to move ahead.
there will be just some discussion around that, for instance, when we put that railing in.
Yeah.
Because I'm not quite certain where we want to go with it with your prior.
Yeah.
But I based it on just, I know it goes from year to years.
So the next three are a sad comment about last year and the state of the green spaces in town, and we had some discussion, but these are capital revenues, or these are barely capitalized. We have lost field services and they have to be restored, but the price makes it capital. So John and I have had a lot of, is this going to happen in the future? And we really don't know. I mean, this is supposed to prevent this recurring again. So, we're really hoping this does. If it becomes something where we have to spend a significant amount in maintenance every year, then it'll have to become maintenance. But if it's a one-time thing and it improves the surface and we don't have to, then that's the hope. So I will note that, just in the interest of getting this stuff done, these ones have already been done or are partially, are they all finished? Yeah, okay. So that's the next three.
So with regards to that, just two questions, observations. One is the curiosity around that, the fact that we'll only do ball fields. But there is grass and other other areas that actually we are not touching. And does it maybe a year after that, because you've only done one field, then the problem just move somewhere else?
I'm trying to hit a lot of them. We're on number 4 now. We found another one yesterday.
Yeah.
Up by the turnaround, make sure it's down.
Yeah.
And loop. Like that's the situation. Everywhere I look now, this hit Bridgewater 3 years ago.
Yeah,
That's why you see like the arc. Day Spring, that's all shut down. I have a hard time finding reason to baseball right now.
yeah. And that's basically, I guess, I was talking to somebody in Model around, they're investing a lot of money to do that, but they're only investing in those spots.
Responses to the tax.
Yeah, and the question is, yes, you do all that,
All the net.
haven't touched the other spots, and then 1 year down the road, the bug kicked in again because
They just move over.
we just
to
moved
it.
over. So and so I was wondering whether in the sector, there might be anything that can be done.
Preventative maintenance. kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Catch it before it gets to that point.
Yeah.
You get rid of the grubs and you get rid of the rodents and the birds. That's the biggest thing. That's what they're trying to chase.
There is a natural treatment for that. I don't know if you're aware of it, but you can spray everything for very, very low cost. And it's a little thing called a nematode. And the nematodes eat the grubs and problem goes away.
Really.
And I've used it in my former life, but I don't know how common it is now around here, but I know it's available.
I wonder if it's like based around the grub be gone. Our
It
product.
could well be, I think it might be that, I don't
Yeah, I'm
know.
interested in hearing what that was.
I had a chap up, because I've got them in my yard, my neighbors on both sides of me do, and across the street. And he said, this landscaping type said that he had used the nematode situation in the past, but that he was having trouble getting it.
Okay,
So, but certainly the grub beetle one sounds like it might be another.
It's probably easy for a government to get it too.
Could be.
Maybe.
Yeah, so the next piece of, I guess, just observation, question. So some of that grab be gone piece is what is in the 18,000 that Mahone Bay United is asking for. So would this be a better place to put it than putting it in the lump sum?
I mean, yeah, we kind of went into a weird place with the last project where like capital work was done under a different organization's name. That's not normal for us, but it was Sequoia's grant, so hey, we're doing what we need to do to get the money.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, if there's capital work that we could be, overseeing, the money flow through the town as opposed to MBU.
yeah,
We could add something here for that. I don't, you'll have to clarify, because I think, we have an amount every year, and I think the idea was, let's try to keep it the
it
same.
is,
The original request was for a little more in the first year. So whether it's like in the 18, or whether it's like, we would add another capital item for 2,500 or something.
mhm.
But if someone could reach out to me, then you would have that. We could still have council consider that while we're in the budget. That's,
No, I was just curious. I mean, I'm okay either way. It's in terms of how you capture it. Wow. That makes sense.
I guess if you have a double count, I'm assuming that regardless of which fund it gets funded from, we're gonna have town staff contract that out to get done. I'm assuming that somebody else from,
So it-
some specialist is coming in with the right equipment, right?
If we make the deal with, the agreement with Mahone Bay United, then it is their intention to contract that type of maintenance work.
Uh-huh.
So we'd be giving them what is budgeted at 18,000 a year, that amount, and then they would contract that type of service provider. So I think this discussion was just that because the agreement's not there yet,
Mhm.
if we wanted to directly do a little something this spring, that could be done either way. It could either be more money in the grant, but it also could be, we just do some work as part of our own budget, and the difference is who's contracting. That's the only difference. So yeah, if right now, the way we've got it set up, it's only we grant the money and then they do it. But if we could consider anything different.
Like, can you get a better deal bundling it all together?
Oh, absolutely. 'Cause
Anyway.
They come once and it's like, just do preventive maintenance.
Just strikes me that like one,
Just do it
One
in the
to
most
go-
efficient way.
yeah,
possible.
anyway, I'm sure that that's where you'll end up.
Well, usually we have in the past 2 years here had a lot of good operational discussions. Maybe Jonathan and Tim should have a little chat about that. Just, if we're working on some green spaces and they're working on green, are we doing something different,
It's the same company.
Yeah,
so-
yeah.
Can't imagine Tim wants to negotiate with the grub removal company, right? He's got other things to do.
Yeah,
So yeah, we'll follow that up.
That's a lot of money though, when you look at the whole pool, isn't it? Wow.
It is, yeah, yeah. And I
That's
think-
also the repair what's there now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And hopefully, it doesn't become an ongoing thing and it,
If we had everything back to square one again, good topsoil, good grass, we're just putting grub beyond that.
So the next one, just working down the thing there, you'll see there's kind of an odd, rose bushes should be in this year, and I mentioned that that was a correction, so in the original version list, we had it in this year. And then, realizing that we were not ever intending to do it before we did the electrical conduiting, which isn't in this year. So, suggesting putting it into 24, 25, and we'll revisit that. But I did want to note that, some of the stuff that's in 24, 25 has already been raised with ACOA previously, so you'll see certain things in here that are in the current year and certain things in here that are in 24, 25 are both things that we have forwarded to ACOA previously. So I don't know what the status of that is. They don't have intakes, they're more of an ongoing thing. We just kind of like make them aware of some of the projects that are eligible. So if they came through with it, it would be a 2-year project. We just do certain things in 1 year, do other things the next year. So that kind of does segue pretty well. And these next 2 items are also within the ACOA stuff. They're basically, downtown visitor supporting tourism type improvements. That's what we've usually raised with ACOA before. So the Marina Boardwalk repair improvement is just to the picnic area, I guess you can call it, at the marina. Just some necessary work. Edgewater Comfort Station, main comfort station. So these are the very detailed results of Jonathan working with our accessibility coordinator. She audited the places, gave some recommendations. Jonathan's costed everything out. There's also some building needs just in terms of the age of the buildings, and for Jonathan to speak to that, so it's a collection of improvements to the area around and including each of the comfort stations in line with both the kind of age of the building, but also accessibility improvements. And in both cases, these are ACOA eligible, so I've raised them with ACOA. That would be up to about 50% if they came through with it. But they're also, I should note, and it's noted in the detailed budget, the new sustainable services fund for the province that they gave us to reserve. These would be projects that would be eligible for that as well on account of accessibility is one of the criteria. But obviously, we don't want to use that if we can leverage matching funding. That's kind of more of a like when it's all on us and we can dip into that. So I'm not looking to pick which ones we use that for because I'd like to try to leverage external funding, but they're in the current year. They don't have to be in the current year. Again, Jonathan can comment on but we also need to have, we're going to have a lot of accessibility improvements. We need to kind of have some flagship things that get done, and those ones are very visible. And we actually do get a fair bit of criticism and commentary from people about improvements that could be made. So all that being said, because I just want to preface it, because we're talking about $150,000 worth of improvements to Walgreens, it's a significant amount. If anyone has any questions here, and Jonathan's here to help answer those as well.
The pool needs a new shed.
Oh,
That's down further. Okay.
yes, we will get to that.
All right.
Mayor, sorry, Penny, did you?
No, go ahead.
Just 2 questions on the conversation, because I think we're all thinking the same thing. We have a $40,000 operating budget. I mean, meanwhile, the adjacent community in Lunenburg is divesting their comfort station, saying it's not a municipal function. Well, we don't agree with that perhaps, but it is like the materiality of the operating expense of the comfort stations is substantial now. It's up maybe 30-40% in 3 years due to the realities of labor and costs and everything else. So like just if we had to prioritize as accounts of so let's just say you put in your application and we get 50% funding up to a certain amount of money. Like which comfort station would we want to do first? If staff has a recommend, I think that's where we could be helpful. Of saying, do you have an opinion on which? I'm assuming $75,000, even at 50% grant, still an immense amount of cash, considering the utility of 480 taxpayers don't get from that. This is entirely a function of supporting the tourism industry and the businesses and commercial businesses. Fair enough. So, do you have any? Do you, from a staff perspective, Jonathan, are one of those buildings a higher priority or in worse repair than the other? Or I mean, we have the volume stats. I think we could,
I honestly, the money to be best invested right now is the Edgewater station, especially for the accessibility side of it. There's quite a bit of work has to be done there to make that front entrance more accessible as well. The hardy board on the outside is in terrible condition. The interior needs a facelift, needs accessibility. Improvements with the plumbing, that's what personally you're gonna invest in the two and that one. And it uses most of the supplies, it uses the most foot traffic.
Yeah, your stat shows much higher utilization on that one. So if we had to pick one this year,
That would be.
and I would still suggest that maybe it's, a question of leaving them both in the budget, trying to leverage funds. And then having staff recommend that we proceed with one at a certain point, perhaps if we haven't leveraged funds, but
Mhm.
it's always asked, have you improved this? And I always like to just be able to say, it's in our budget. But we could also, deal with that by motion, like if I'm soliciting funds from a COA, we need a motion that says that. And,
Is there examples around the province where there is a specific kind of commercial element of us that supports these kinds of things?
Well, it's actually a perfect question right now. So the answer is the marketing levy, the accommodations levies. Have been at times applied to this because, as Town Lunenburg talked about, this isn't a direct municipal service, like it's not even our residents directly. But it is something that directly supports the tourism sector. And therefore, if we institute that as a form of taxation, which is a room night levy, then we could use that room night levy to help support the operating costs of the conference station. And my understanding, I know we've been asked to do a report, there's still a couple of little details because this is very new, but I believe that could be at least partially applied there.
Well, that applies to folks with accommodation, but a lot of the folks who are benefiting from it, people who need retail, kind of like establishments.
So there's no special purpose retail tax anymore. We didn't
Yeah.
used to have such a thing.
Yeah.
So you just have to say, is the commercial tax sufficient to
Sufficient,
say
yeah.
that the commercial tax base is contributing? I mean, these projects are not shown as capital out of revenue. I'm just gonna go quickly scroll up here. I believe these ones are still down as being capital reserve. Let me just double check. These are a bit larger than the ones we usually would show as capital out of revenue, and we are trying to leverage them with external funding, which we talked about as a good criteria for capital reserve. They're showing as capital reserve right now.
Mhm.
And then what's in those questions, because I think, I believe it's a function that we should support. It's not necessarily a municipal function per se, but it's a function that we have the capability to support and does impact our town in some ways. It will influence to our folks.
When you look at the alternative.
Yeah, that's not very good for the town. So I think that there is value in us and the chamber having a good conversation about the long-term funding of operational costs and then prioritization around, are we able to maintain those for the lifetime of council and town, and how best to fund it? Because I can foresee a certain council coming in and saying, well, we're giving those up. I can clearly foresee that. So having a good conversation with the chamber that actually embeds some agreement as to how this can be mutually done over the years might be very helpful. So.
Well, we
No,
do
that's
have-
fine.
we do have a chamber liaison here, and we also do generally have dialogue with chamber, like we just had a meeting with them, so I'm sure there's appropriate ways to. I would say they need some time to digest the idea of taking on the cost, if that's where you're going with it, but yeah, I think it's certainly a conversation to be had.
If I may,
Yes, please.
in the absence of a protocol like we have in many countries where retailers are required to provide public restrooms. Which they're clearly not here. I find it hard to understand how a municipality can say this is not a municipal responsibility, if only from a beautification point of view. But I have a slight segue, that's we have 2 municipally managed restrooms now. Will we have one, if as and when we build a new pool, will there be an accessible washroom in that facility that could be used by the sports field and the kids in the playground and all that kind of stuff as well? So that's a clear need as
I
well.
think it's just a question of, is the pool located in that area, which we had to Peter, and then can we design it with the access so that it has an easy access if the pool's not open, but there's a game at the ball field but that's a great design consideration, yeah. And I think it's been pointed out that, other town facilities can have washrooms that can be open to the public. But the use of the public washrooms is, it's just where they're located and the visibility is much higher than like people used to come in here sometimes. I mean, with COVID, we kind of, obviously we're not encouraging that, but that washroom sees tremendous use, so.
Councillor Wilson, you mentioned the situation in Europe. It's a legal requirement there that shop owners have to let people who
Yes.
come in the door to use their facilities. If that's all they come in for, they don't have to be shopping necessarily, but there's a legal requirement for them to do it.
So
And
we
yet
could
there's
pass a
also
bylaw.
more public washroom facilities in general
Yeah.
as well.
So we could pass a bylaw. Excited.
So I mean, unless anyone wants to suggest any change, obviously we'll come back when there's either news around the funding side of things, or we're saying we really feel we should actually get this out to tender, and you guys can decide then if you actually are, I'm not gonna move it ahead without talking to you or getting external funding.
So you said something almost tongue in cheek, but I was sort of wondering, with the landed by like NPS changes. I'm assuming, because when we had our shop, we had to have a washroom. That's a requirement, right?
Yeah, I don't know how the requirements to have the building code says you have to have one.
Yeah.
How you're allowed to let people use it, seemingly you don't have to, or. Maybe people just never try to build a business and say you can't use my washroom to account.
They do,
I
though.
really don't know.
What?
They do.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen it happen, but so is that something that we can investigate? If we-
Yeah,
if we have
I don't
the
know where to
power-
start,
if-
but I'll-
If we have the powers to do that.
Yeah, I doubt we have the power to do it, but we can try to.
One of the outcomes of COVID is we had well patronized businesses in town have a signs on the front door saying the washroom's closed due to COVID. So we're 2 years later, the WHO just eliminated the international emergency. The signs are still on the door. I guess.
You go up to areas like Bears Lake, there's not a public washroom.
No, I mean, the city does, I guess it's just opening a large can of worms, but the rec facilities, they don't really offer.
Yes.
We've gone from $20,000 to $40,000 a year in my tenure on council. And now we're talking 150,000 capital.
Yeah.
It's a real cost for 400.
And it was-
And it's one
the
that,
original cost, it was very substantial.
oh, yeah.
You can go to the French style, they're cheaper.
Anyway,
And we expanded the season for.
and we've expanded the season,
So that
so,
was part of the cost, it wasn't just all cost increases.
oh yeah, fair enough. It's change of scope too, fair enough.
So the next one is related, if we are improving the comfort station at Maine, which is adjacent to the marina. There's long been a desire to fit some laundry facilities in there that the marina could make available to people. Jonathan looked at that, we used to think it was a pretty substantial amount of renovation difference. Jonathan, we've put this in at a very small
Yes,
effort, so can you just describe how they would fit in, like?
so it'll be a stack with washer and dryer in the utility room. The eye wash station will be moved. And then, of course, all your utilities are already there, your hot water, your drain, your cold water, so a lot of that's just the washer and dryer. A little bit of plumbing and one electrical service, 40-year service.
So if we didn't purchase the equipment, it would basically just be when we do the renovation that we're already doing, change a couple of fixtures. This budget would include purchasing equipment. I will say this was raised in the long list of things I shared with the COA because they would love to support some marina operations. That's one of their things they do. But ultimately, the town could easily turn around to the marina and say, like, buying the equipment's not a town responsibility. So I put it in here to kind of show that it was slightly different in order for no one to think we were slipping it in with the renovation, because it does serve the marina users rather than the general public, but.
You are slipping it in.
Well, no, it's right. Name on it and everything.
Are these coin operated washer and dryers? Like, is there?
I mean,
cost
those are the choices that would be made. So if we say to the marina, like, when we're renovating, if we say, hey, we're renovating, do you guys want to install these? That we would leave that to them to do.
I'm all for lending the marina the money notionally, getting cost recovery, and as soon as we've recovered $5,000 in quarters, they can have all they can have all the revenue going into the future. I mean, because we don't want to have we don't want to have town staff collecting, $12 worth of quarters once a week.
We're dealing with operational issues.
Just to bring Mr. Feeny up to the president, it's now Looney's.
Loonies and Tunes. It's still $12 getting my car washed last week. Anyway, I'm okay with that.
So in principle, I don't support the idea of the town having anything to do with the washer and dryer. I mean, in terms of the responsibilities, I totally support the municipality cooperating in the comfort stations, but not in buying a washer and dryer.
So we could always take that off and still, if the opportunity arose, work with the association.
You wanted to go first?
Oh, go ahead.
So I would be supportive if there's a cost recovery element, because we're basically just keep providing them with a loan that can come back to us. But I'll go back to my second, last time we were talking about the marina. And when I said about my conflict around public funds going into this facility and the public not being able to use it the way it should be, I think it was suggested that what we might want to consider is build a wharf that people can fish from, so that you're separating users. And my question is for council is, don't you think that's something we need to start thinking about and actually costing and doing? Otherwise, what we're doing now is just, it's, for me, there's lots of iniquity in just providing this funding, continued funding to the marina, when we know that there's access is an issue for folks.
So I can't comment about the bigger picture of what's equitable, that's for you guys to talk about, but in terms of could we get moving on a fishing pier? I mean, I would say that it's we go out and we ask someone with engineering expertise to review the facility and recommend where a fishing pier and how a fishing pier could be added to it. If we wanted to just start with a little conversation with the Marina Association, it could just be a motion for staff to explore with no budget attached. And then if we feel we get to a point where we need a budget to look at the feasibility, we come back on that. So I would say a motion on the fishing pier, because we will forget about it. But it can just be that staff explore with the staff, work with the Mahomey Wooden Boat Society to explore the option of adding a fishing pier within the area of the wharf and marina, something like that.
I'll make a motion to that.
I'll second it. So just add a narrative to that in the sense that we've seen the engineering reports around support structure, and at some point a significant amount of money, council having to raise that or finding ways to raise that, that will have to be done. I'm not sure I'll be on council when that conversation comes, but if we really want to do something equitably, when that work is being considered or contemplated, then there should be a critical look around, are you investing all this money just for a specific subset of folks, or do you want to create a situation where everybody in the town can benefit? And maybe it starts with that conversation with the marina, but I think it's something that we should start having a conversation about. Lots of money to think about. Maybe not for some who don't enjoy fishing, maybe not something that we actually think we should invest in, but I find that cultures like this, maritime cultures, I would assume when folks who are younger, they would be fishing off.
Yeah.
And we have a beach, we have a town beach,
Yeah.
but that area could be explored, if it's not able to be at the town wharf, we do have the town beach, which there possibly could be something done.
I don't like you using that term, but yes, we could explore it. I would not say we have. Anybody watching, don't look for the town beach. But there is some room adjacent that could possibly.
Well, many of us learned to swim at that time. So.
No,
We could also explore the use of just putting a float, like we've got the other.
It could be a floating structure.
It could just have a float off of one of those that they can fish off of, and it's not permitted for a boat to tie up to its for, for use for residents and stuff like that.
Could be a floating structure, and in many ways that may be the most cost-effective option when we get to it.
So we have a vote, a motion on the floor.
We do have a motion on the floor. No more on the question.
Can I hear the motion, please?
Oh, I was gonna say.
The council directs staff to work with the Wooden Boat Society to find a location for a fishing pier at the marina.
I think that's.
Okay.
Options, to explore options for fishing pier, I think is how I said it, just because that leaves the floating, not.
Can I just weigh in before you vote and just remind
Okay,
people that
we're on the question, Ben. Go ahead.
30 years ago, when people used to fish out that wharf, there were 6 boats moored in the harbor.
Yep.
And 1 or 2 a day coming in and going out.
Mm.
Now it's what, 90,
125.
125 boats in the harbor and probably 20 or 30 coming in every day. It's a totally different.
And there's only 3 or 4 boats that actually tie up at the government wharf. Most of them are out on moorings, and they come in, pick stuff up, and they go back out again.
Since I jumped on Suzanne's use of the term town beach, we don't have a government wharf unless we're the government. I just want, I just want people to know, because we have recently had a complaint saying, don't our tax dollars, this is a non-resident, pay for this thing? No, not for 20, 30 years now. Actually, the municipal tax dollars are the only tax dollars paying for that thing. Sorry, I just,
No,
people often forget that the federal government no longer puts any money into it, so I just wanted to know.
I'm still sitting on the beach.
So, this is just a philosophical comment. It's just that many of the issues on this list have to do with that dialectic between our municipal government addressing the needs of our community people and the need of the community to stimulate the economy and to address visitors, the needs of visitors. So they're both needs in a way, so we have to be able to address both. So I think this is a great motion and I'm happy to support it.
Just a final point, I know we've talked about this several times, and when we meet with the Wooden Boat Festival Society, which
Wooden
I
Boat
think-
Society.
the Wooden Boat Society, which I think was Councillor Carver's motion last meeting, then we'll have some of these conversations, but there's a recurring theme, and the recurring theme is there's an incredible amount of money being invested in services that are not for people who live here or pay any of these taxes. And so we may have 125 yachts in the harbor, of which maybe 5 are owned by people who actually live in town. And 100 are owned by people who live in Halifax, Bridgewater, La Have, and other places. Fair enough. Come on, but the funding mechanism is not working for us anymore. And we can't even park, can't fish, you can't walk your dog.
Yeah.
And the historical norm, which was on Victoria Day weekend, what happened?
Dip
All the boats went in the harbor. And I guarantee we'll be down there, and I don't know what dump day is, but if every one of those cradles is out of there in 2 weeks, I'll be very surprised. Anyway. We'll see. So are we gonna vote, Mayor? Let's move this
Okay.
along.
Anything else on the question? All in favor?
Fishing pier, done.
Motion's carried.
Actually get that in the budget.
Done and done.
$1 million.
Could be really nice.
Exactly. We're not doing the pumper, we're doing the fishing pier.
Getting back to the water and dryer.
Yeah, but I think.
Sorry,
if it were-
I can't support putting water and dryer down there.
Sorry.
Taxpayers' monies.
No, well,
There's,
this-
excuse me, point of order, there's side conversations
Excuse
going
me,
on in
Jen?
this meeting.
My apologies.
Yes, it's mine too.
Thank you, Councillor Carver.
I just can't support putting the washer and dryers down there. It's, and I mean, I know it's $5,000, but that's $5,000 I don't think we need to spend to support, once again, an entity that is running a facility for the town, but we're incurring all these expenses. So I'm sorry, I can't support it.
So in this case, I just want to remind you, we don't really let it go past we either remove it now, change it to say like on a cost recovery basis or something like that, or we just move on and it stays there. So I just want to, like, if you want to make a motion or anybody wants to make a motion.
Just keep in mind that that number is based on just a normal stack of washer and dryers that are going into like coin operated. I guarantee that price to play. Because even more in the heavy duty commercial. So just be aware of that.
If they want to put a coin operated one in, I think the Marine Society, with Boat Society.
So
I'm sorry, the what, Councillor?
If there's gonna be a washer and dryer put in there, I think the Boat Society that's running.
Wooden
that,
Boat Society.
They should do it and then they recover their costs. You
Yeah.
go and operate whichever way they want.
I would expect, this is just an opinion, that they would reserve the use of the washer and dryer for the people who were coming in on the boats. It's not something that the public would likely have access to.
No.
But would have to be confirmed. Councillor Carver?
So I'd like to move that that item be removed from the budget and that should so the motion would be to remove that item from the budget and to entertain any request from the Wooden Boat Society in future should they wish. In which case it could be.
Okay.
Do-
Moved and seconded on the question.
Just on the
Councillor
question,
Feeney?
so fair enough, I mean, I do think that there would be some merit in having staff run a very quick analysis on cost recovery. As I understand that the Wooden Boat Fest, the marina is now is metered for water charges
Mhm.
and electrical charges. Historically, that wasn't the case, but I think a few years ago, we actually turned on a meter, so we know how much water consumption and power consumption is happening by the Marine Association. They're essentially a customer now, as I understand it, and we charge them. So like maybe there is a business case for the Marina Association to have washer and dryer facilities, coin operated, cost recovery, plus the incremental water that they use obviously generates water for the revenue for the water utility. And the electricity that they use generates revenue for the electrical utility. But if we let the Marina Association do their own thing in that publicly owned building, I agree with the mayor, that will become an exclusive asset of the Marina Association to be used exclusively for the marina participants. And some renter in town may not have washer, may not have a laundromat facility, wouldn't get that benefit. So I think I'm there spiritually that I think that this is an investment that should be borne by the organization. But if we're going to have it in a town facility, the comfort station, it has to be available for the entire community. And the only way to ensure it's going to be available for the entire community is if we write the checks and then we hope that we can get cost recovery. Because otherwise it's just another, and then we're gonna have, well, you're not allowed to use the washroom unless you're a marina person. You can't park down there unless you're a marina person. You can't fish down there unless you're a marina person. So you can't use the washer and dryer unless you're a marina person. That isn't, I don't think that's what we want. So I just think maybe we send this off back to staff, refer it back to staff to put a few numbers together about, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't strike me it would take too many people using the machine to recover $10,000 in capital costs, but I'm out of my depth with understanding that business, but maybe we would get a payback in 2 or 3 years.
So in terms of understanding the motion and the spirit behind the motion, is it a question of we don't want any town funding going to the marina, even with a cost recovery basis, or because
No, I would be willing to withdraw the motion and to support a cost recovery method the point for me is not to, as Councillor Feeney has so eloquently expressed, dedicating town tax money to something that's potentially a private operation. Yeah, so I'd be happy to withdraw the motion. It was one way of trying to deal with it. And if Councillor Feeney wants to make a motion related to the
So are
cost
you
recovery.
withdrawing your motion?
I'm withdrawing the motion, yes.
Are you?
I think the second part of the motion would have addressed it in another way, that the boat society could apply to the town to do that. Because I don't think we can just go ahead and say, okay, they're gonna be responsible for repaying this money, without advising them first.
Okay.
Mayor, I'd move that council direct staff. Oh, pardon me, are we, sorry, Richard,
Yeah.
are you
Yeah,
okay with,
go ahead.
are you okay with rescinding
Yeah.
the motion? Richard?
Yeah.
Council direct staff to prepare a report on the viability of a town-owned and operated laundry in the comfort station on Government Wharf. Conversation located at the marina. Do you have a friendly amendment?
No, not a friend, I'll.
Clean that up for me.
I'll second that question, so I think I'm wary of it being town operated. In the sense that we are adding more work to Jonathan or somebody to be doing it.
Like the marina.
Yeah, I think the marina should, but the requirement we should have is that our facility is open to the public for use by the public.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we're getting at is the same arrangements that apply to the operation of the wash.
Yeah.
Because the marina does do the maintenance of that washroom, and that's basically a contract that they have with us to operate it for the public. But also, since they're on site, it's much more cost effective than having an outside person come do the janitorial. So, yeah, I think it would just be, want to do the same with, if we add any services, they would be treated in a similar way.
So amended as described.
Is Kelly's gonna work cut out for this one?
Yes or no?
Well, we're just preparing a report, so it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to go to the.
Okay, so
Yeah.
direct staff to prepare a report on the viability of a town-owned but not operated washer and dryer as a
Town
pump
finance.
station.
I would just put the
Town
addition
finance.
of a
The
washer and dryer to the
Yes.
public comfort station at
Yeah.
plumbing or at the marina. If that's okay with you.
That's fine, that's fine.
Councillor now has.
One of the questions and one of the issues raised when we said about not doing it was that the public would be able to use it. And that it was renters and stuff like that. The problem being is, it's only gonna be available for 3 months of the year. They won't be able to use that facility if they're a renter in town any other time other than that.
It will only be seasonal.
It's
It's
seasonal.
more than 3 months,
It'd
but
be very seasonal, so I don't think we're helping with the renters and the people in town a whole lot by doing that.
I think you'll get a lot of maybe the traveling public who, yeah, like Joe's saying, people who are traveling but not, yeah.
So open up to the public, you can't even be in that building because we're just showing it in the corner of our utility room station. So you can't leave the door open to the public, so now you think of another facility or an add-on.
It would only be open during the same hours as the washroom. though,
Exactly,
or when the-
or you have it open all year round, whatever you wanna do, doesn't matter to me, but just saying, you cannot be in that.
We'll do a report on it if the motion passes, so we can get all this consideration.
Okay.
Councillor Kerwin.
So thank you. Procedurally, I don't know what to do with my thought, which is that I would like to see in the motion a reference to the cost recovery piece. So that we, in the report, we get information on the feasibility of the cost recovery aspect of it.
Kelly?
Was it? I don't think it was. What do I-
Including cost recovery, how about that?
There you go. This is the
Yeah,
way to-
cost neutral.
Yeah, and maybe you
Thank you, Councillor Kerwin.
Okay.
I'm not clear that, did you second this motion?
I did second,
Okay.
it, yeah.
Song, second, no, second.
Motion second.
Too tired for this.
Burning the candle at both ends for the whole week, so can you read what you have, if you don't mind?
Sure, that council directs staff to prepare a report on the addition of a town-owned washer and dryer, including cost recovery. Now, town-owned washer and dryer at the comfort station located at Momo Bay Marina. I'm not putting including cost recovery in the right
Including the
location.
feasibility of cost recovery.
Okay,
Town finance.
okay.
So this is a lot of discussion about a $5,000 item.
It is.
And it really reflects the dialectic that we have to deal with around this, the community, working for the residents of our community and to support the thriving economy in the community. So it's an interesting discussion, all on the basis of $5,000.
I mean, and also not only the magnitude of the cost, but just the number of projects here. My assumption is when we get down to utilities in a few minutes, we'll go much faster. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
belabor the point on, Scott says we need to replace a pump, it's.
Rectifier.
Gonna do. Okay, so the next one is another little bit of nuance.
We have to
Yes,
vote on
sorry,
the
right.
motion.
Right?
Sorry.
All in favor?
Hmm.
Motion's carried.
After all that wouldn't be good.
Whatever she said, it's carried.
So the next one has a little bit of nuance as well is, and I'm glad Jonathan's still here for this, replacing the ball field outfield fence. So Jonathan comment on the condition of it, but also I did want to note that there may be, and I know the condition is bad, there may be some interplay between this and the pool. So I have debated whether to recommend deferring this, but maybe Jonathan, just speak to the current condition and your
I
thoughts.
mean, it's still functional, still works, it's just really stretched and torn and. You don't try to do anything with it, I mean, make it, put lipstick on the face and that, but still not gonna look bad.
Do you see it as a safety hazard at this point?
No, not so much, it's just some years of abuse in baseball,
So
it's nature of the beast.
Yeah, it looks like some people have cut parts of the
Yeah,
fence
a
too.
few
Is it to
spots.
allow their dogs in the road or
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know.
what happened there, I said that.
Well,
Yeah.
there's some entrances there that are.
Yeah,
So the question here is really just like, are we sure that the fence should be where it is to the extent that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
planning exercise around the pool might be a reason to preempt this now that we've got that in the budget?
Deputy Mayor,
I would suggest you could move that forward until you get to a place where.
We know what we're doing.
what you need.
Is that a motion? If it's a motion, I'll second it.
The
Yeah.
usual kind of motion we do here is. move to the next
Defer.
year.
Yeah, just,
Defer.
yeah.
Good with that. One minute for a cup of coffee, right back.
okay,
You could get to the end of the rec section, but if you're just grabbing a cup of coffee.
I
wait.
I'll be there.
Okay, keep going.
Okay,
I have
that-
a motion on the table, so,
Oh, yeah.
oh,
all right.
I'd say who seconded the motion?
sure Joe didn't need to leave before voting.
Patty? Yeah.
Are we waiting for Council Feeny to return or?
Yeah.
Make coffee.
I've got to.
We're now
on you,
You
Debbie.
guys gotta give me a break.
No, no.
Well, that's it. We'll have to have a break now for sure, somebody can make the coffee.
So we didn't have a vote yet.
So we did not, on the question, all in favor? Motion's carried, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to take 5 minutes?
Yes.
So let's finish this.
Let's
rec
finish
section
the
and-
recreation.
Okay, so I want to let Jonathan get on with his day. He was
Yeah,
on
yeah.
his day.
I
The
thought we
next,
needed coffee, go
the
ahead.
next one on here, bench installation, so you'll remember as part of the bench donation program, there was a recommendation to put this $20,000 item here. This would only be as we move forward with bench installations and there are improvements required in terms of access, so putting in the concrete underneath pad, a walkway to an adjacent parking space if it's an accessible location. So this didn't inherently include the purchase of any actual benches and picnic tables by the town. Now, the town may wish to do that. And potentially, as the year goes on, may wish to direct some of this budget to be spent on that. I think the only chance we'd have of spending this is if every single location we identified, we had donations this year. And I will say, we've already got several in the works. People contacted us, which is great. So it's, you know, that's what this budget is for, to be used as we get donations to support the installations. Unless we got a recommendation saying council put in something, if we came back, we would do that separately, and it would only potentially be in respect of not receiving the donations, but. Yeah, so that's what this one's for. I just wanted to know, we're not just, we don't have $20,000 to go in, there's not something we're doing unless we get.
Question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So the design of the benches, there were some suggested designs or styles. Are the donors bound by that? The styles that were suggested, or can they make a
So there's
choice?
two ways to donate assets to the town. Either you donate money and then we do the thing. And so we're trying to constrain the options there because we're the ones who have to actually go buy it. And we don't want people saying, can you look at some different options for us and give us some, you know, that's not really what we're here for. So if you want to donate money, we give them a pretty defined number of options. If you want to donate an actual asset, like you've got a table or a bench, and maybe it's like a, you know, art piece, maybe it's very much more than what we would normally do. Or maybe you make natural wood benches for a woodland area and you want to donate them, or, you know, we always can accept donated assets under the donation policy. They just have to be reviewed by Public Works to ensure that they're not going to present safety hazards. And then we would receive them based on an assessment of their value, so. That's always why we have had that type of donation before. Usually that runs into, you know, they're not always going to be as accessible as what we might do. But yeah, so that's hopefully that answers the question.
So just as a follow-up, I've expressed this before, I was a little concerned about the the durability of the bench designs that were circulated. And recall that approximately 10 years ago, when the current bench, for example, was installed in the aquatic gardens, it has a much sturdier wood composition. It's rather than the 2x4s, it's like 3x3 or 4x4. They're very sturdy, and they were chosen because of the protection. They were less vulnerable to vandalism and so on. So just
So,
putting that out there.
I guess two or three quick points on it. So we guarantee them for 5 years. So the wood benches, we're only really looking at them as having a 5-year useful life. When it comes to, vandalism or damage, the ones we've looked at for the wood, this is only for the park benches, is the concrete ended wooden insert benches. So the benefit is they're easy to take out some pieces or do repairs with. And the heaviness of the concrete helps to keep them in place. These are not the ones that are mounted in concrete. So I guess those are some considerations. And then, Jonathan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about with respect to these, like the park bench concept. Did I cover the
Yeah,
size of
there's-
the wood? I don't know if there's, I don't know the 2x4. I was unable to speak to that.
I agree. I mean, of course, it's 4x4 is stronger, it's 2x4, but it's also like the materials made it of. I mean, it's more like pressure treated, so that will last much longer. As long as it's treated better, treated on the ends and all properly. It's, I know the concrete structures where the wood goes on, as long as it's put together properly, where it never sees. We find a lot of times to try to take the boards off later. They always seize fast, they pull the inserts in, and they're a real pain.
Mhm,
If they put together right properly in the first time with the right materials,
mhm.
you could exceed 5 years easily.
Yeah, because I think that part of discouraging vandalism is to repair it as soon as possible.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, so if it's easily repaired, then that's a good argument for that. Thank you.
So early on, we had talked about giving people some choice of color options, and with the manufactured, the larger items, you can. But with the pressure treated wood, we kind of run into the same issue we had with the cemetery. So, those ones probably wouldn't have color options for people, but they're also being located in woodland areas. Maybe it's better that they not have color options for people. So, yeah. We can move on to the next thing is the Jubilee Park new gazebo roof. Jonathan, do you just want to comment on
Yeah,
that?
this needs, just take the old asphalt off and install the old thing, it's in terrible shape. Park looks good, other than that, structure for the gazebo is in great shape. It just needs to face from the roof. I mean, I know it's open to everything, but
It's a metal roof we're putting on, right?
metal roof. That's what I suggest.
Yeah.
So 3,000 will cover that?
Sorry?
3,000 will cover
Yes,
that?
that's the materials, we reabsorb them later. We'll do that ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not on the roof, but just on the park. What happened to the bear?
That was part of our graffiti vandalisms last year. The bears are there now. It doesn't look like a bear much anymore. Yeah,
Very disappointing.
yes. We did put it back once. That seems like they were getting it. It was not big enough.
So if that one's okay, the next one is the BIC new thermal pane window inserts and mini. So Jonathan, I'm just gonna jump right to you on this because I know you've already had some thoughts since we originally included this. If you just want to summarize why you had a recommendation about the BIC.
Well, there was a significant amount of mold inside the building. Just because there's just a plain glass pane window, there are no thermal panes. Yeah, there's an air handler in there, which is kind of controlled through the mini split. But as in heating and cost savings for the building. And all the mold that's around the windows that we run bonding every year. We just said take the old wooden windows out, and just slide inserts in, which is almost a direct replacement for silicone wood, but they're horrible.
So with that, do you think the $10,000 budget is still reasonable for?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're the owners
So
of the building, even though it
We're
is.
just
leased to
replacing the
the-
windows or that and the mini, and a new mini split.
No, that they actually repaired that,
Oh, yeah, okay, so it's just windows.
just windows, yeah.
Okay.
We would understand that it wasn't unrepairable, but.
Oh, there you go.
So would it be less than 10,000 for just the windows? Or you
Yeah, I
think
think the
that's
number is
still-
like 6.5 or 6.8, it's big 7,000.
So we're the owners of the building, so, you know, ultimately, this kind of things our responsibility, even with the lease structure. And then the last one, we already had a question about the shed here. John, you just want to comment? This work's already been done, I think.
The shit.
That's cool, sorry.
Oh, yes, and that's back to around what we do with the pool. We didn't do anything with it yet. We could just fix it up this year, we're just gonna wait.
Okay, so you could fix it up, you think?
Just, yeah, I mean, it should be replaced, but that's, you know, what the requirement is there for another year.
And how portable would the shed be if it is replaced this year? Would it be a sunken cost or would it be a portable shed?
I don't think we have a portable shed, that's what we do.
So that's the question.
Yeah, and I was just going to suggest to look into the cost of the community college building a shed, because sometimes that's a cheaper alternative, and it's providing a learning experience at the school. They do have a program, they do that, but you have to get your name in there on the list.
I don't know how long it would take, the season's very small.
Yeah,
So I don't
yeah,
think
I wouldn't
it's
say
charged
this year, you probably missed for next year, but if you're looking to delay
Is
it,
this sort of just like buying one like you'd see it at Scotia Building Supplies, just,
No, just a kid.
just buy the kit?
So just, it's kind of a question, is it a sunken cost or not? I mean, I think our feeling is we probably would be able to reuse the
Yeah,
shed.
you bring it to the soccer
So,
field, use it for
A
that.
couple sheets of plywood, we'll look at a couple boards, we can make it usable safely for another season.
So that's the choice. We can either call it maintenance, drop this item, they'll fix it up to the extent they can, the existing one, or we buy a pre-formatted one, we can move it later. It's really, you know, so if somebody wants to remove it, they do. But it is a, you know, it's a needed thing.
We're looking at replacing the pool or moving the pool, whatever. Do we have a time frame on that? Is it 2 years, 3 years?
So, big discussion. I mean, the plan as it stands right now, and it's the next item here, is to have the engineering completed this year. And then to move into construction next year.
Okay.
I think we're still hoping to secure external funds. I know the mayor and I spoke recently with our MLA in this regard, and council had written to our MLA in this regard. So hopefully, before we have to make that choice about proceeding to construction, we'll have external funds.
Yeah, the only reason I asked was because if we're looking at that in the next short term, then maybe we should just incorporate the new shed with that and just do what we've got for now.
Yeah, that's the question. So if somebody wants to move to remove that shed, that's what we'll do. We'll just patch up the existing.
Councillor Wilson.
Move to remove the shed. Put it in the other, next project, 75 or 74.
And seconded. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the current year projects. I will note.
Oh, I just have a question about 74. And maybe it
Oh,
was.
no, sure. I was assuming we didn't have, but if there's any more discussions of that, happily, yeah. So this is the pool item.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, I'm confused about, what you said we were finished.
I was thinking that if we had no other discussion about the pool item, but if you have more discussion about the pool item.
Oh, about number 74, and maybe this didn't, you've already said this and it didn't sink in. How, if we're putting $55,000 into the pool this year, how necessary, what are the renovations?
Oh, so that's for design.
Engineering.
It's just for design, okay,
Yes, it's just-
okay.
Yeah.
I can't see that. It's just-
Yeah, no,
okay.
the proceeding.
Okay, right, thank you,
Yeah, so it's not actually like renovation.
thank you.
I mean, we are doing a little bit, but that's under maintenance activities.
Okay.
So there will be some just minor repair stuff's already.
Not to
happened.
get too far off on a tangent, but if we were gonna contemplate other pool locations on town land, some other part of the Jubilee Park complex, I would suggest. Like we probably want to know that before we have our final version of the land use bylaw, right? So we have some property that's currently zone protected, it might be turned into recreation. Perhaps, right? Like we moved.
Yeah, it's a
If the
good
pool,
point.
if the pool.
I think before we got to
Anyway.
first reading, we would have the report that's been requested about the pool
Oh,
location.
yeah.
So they wanted to do the engagement during the season, like with when the pool's open, you know.
I mean, just, I do like the idea of having the pool in a more centrally located location with parking and accessible washrooms that can be used for multi-use. I mean, it seems to be more logical.
Flipping it around on the property and, yeah. so-
Seems more logical.
Councillor Carver, are you
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
okay? Deputy Mayor?
Oh, just curious, what's the appetite on council around what if you're considering building a new pool, that the splash pad, I mean, I know it's a 10-year plan, that the splash pad be considered as part of that design or project.
Yeah, I would support that, and also if people keep in mind that a splash pad is not only useful for children or small children, it's useful for people of all ages, including people in wheelchairs, so it has a very versatile potential group of users and all ages.
Dogs like.
Yes, there's that too, but they should be on a leash.
Yeah, so this is a good point though, and everybody brings up the next 5 items are future year, but just for context, things we've considered in future years, including a splash pad, an
Yeah.
agility park, an ice rink, and just not a or auditorium, like an outdoor ice rink, and a skate park. So they're not being committed to, but because we want to have the, thought as the cost. And I honestly think they're all well under what the real cost would be, but that might represent the town cost for those projects if we get to leveraging them down the road, so. They're just so everyone knows they're in there, but the status of them. So that was the end of the recreation and culture, and we had thought maybe we'd take
Does that
that
need
as
a
a
vote?
break.
Does that need a vote to
Yeah,
this?
with the question.
Oh, I was just thinking it was like a design consideration, so we could consider it, if you could
Do
make
do
it.
you need a motion for that?
I don't think we need a motion, because it's not in the current, if the splash pad was in the current year, I would say yes, let's. But it's more just like, let's keep an eye on the possibility. It's part of the location conversation, it's part of the design.
Pick location, you'd have to pick it.
And I'm sure we won't be the only ones coming up with possible design considerations, we'll hear some
Or
stuff.
location consideration, lots of opinions.
So if you're good with that,
Yeah.
yeah, so the next sections, I thought we could let Jonathan go, because we're into fire and utilities. And then we can have a break, and then we can come back, and to the extent that we want to keep going with this morning, and.
Here you go, Dylan.
I'm just saying to you as the chair, it's what I was thinking.
Can we have a break now? Before we go on to.
Jonathan, you done? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's 10:25. 10:30?
Yep.
Is that enough time, Kelly, to get the pot on?
I already did it.
So.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.
We are live.
So fire service, next section, and I'm just gonna switch from going like line by line, because everything requires an explanation, to just a quick overview of the whole section and taking questions, so. Purchase of new radios, PPE, those are just a standard thing we leave in every year, and they need to be replaced regularly, and the fire chief will tell us what. Purchase of new helmets is a specific initiative. I believe we're trying to access the Emergency Service Providers Fund to get some subsidy of that. So that's just being launched right now for the year, but the total cost is there. A bunch of stuff we did last year. We're doing a lot of stuff with the fire service, of course. And then the pumper, so the chassis deposit would probably be this year. And it probably will be about that amount. You know, we're committed to the whole thing.
Yep.
We've already purchased it. So this is just a reference to the cash flow that we're expecting in the year.
Do I see Counselor now riding around on just the chassis? The rest of the
You
money-
can't afford their
If we show up in the fire, just a chassis.
Yeah.
Sorry, you can't help you.
So I guess, and you'll note there's another fire vehicle down for a few years in the future at the same price, and that's really just intended to make it clear that we'll have to grapple with that in the future. I don't know the price will be the same. I just put it the same price for now. But any questions?
Probably more expensive.
Counselor Carver.
So what's the estimated lifespan of this $1,200,000 vehicle? Wow. it's
There's
such
two
a-
ways to answer it. We're allowed to have it as our primary pumper in terms of insurance for 20 years.
20 years.
And then
20, right.
they often last longer. I don't know, Richard, if you want to make a comment,
Yeah.
usually we might sell an older one, but they.
We usually have in the past, well, we don't now, but we usually have an older one that we have in reserve in case something happens to one of the other ones. But yeah, 20 years. So the one we're replacing now is a bit more than 20 years, so it's over this, span. So actually, we're down to about 8 years now before we have to replace our other pumper.
And there is an opportunity to discuss, at year 20, is it better to dispose for the residual value if we can line up the purpose of the new one? Or do we squeeze what value we can, like Richard said, you don't have, every truck doesn't have to be 20 years, it's just, we have to have a primary that is, so.
Well, I think we're quite a few pumpers. I think that's what down the road is determined.
And follow, thank you. And how often does the Underwriters Association check in with us in terms of, because one of the vehicles was recommended in 2008 to be replaced, and it took a very long time until we had a new fire hall to replace it because of the specs for it.
I don't know when the last time that they were actually here and reviewed it. They do a lot of it just off-site.
Mhm.
I don't know how often they actually review them. I mean, it's probably not as often so that we'd be in dire need if we went to a 23 years instead of 20 years. Because
And they also do apply some nuance, like with the
Yeah.
supply chain issues that we've had in the last few years. They've been saying if you've got it ordered, we're happy to
Yeah.
understand that the delivery times are very long and.
Mhm.
So, right now we are at a point where we should have the new one, but because we've ordered it, I think we're reasonably considered there.
So with this level of borrowing, we must have we need to figure out how to get more revenue for fire. Like quite a bit more revenue. Like this doesn't, I mean, aren't we going to hit? So that we've got another 1.2 million coupled with the full load of the debt coming online the full load next year. We're at 22 cents now. And that isn't even covering the fire hall debt, right?
Yeah, the full load of the fire hall debt is in this year, but part of it is borne by the town.
we do it 20.
The full payments this isn't a partial year for payments on the fire
What I'm
station.
saying is that the fire station debt payment is not in fire services.
Yes, yeah, so
Okay.
it's fully
I don't
in
know
the
if
budget,
council-
but it's not.
Council following that,
Yeah.
like, so the fire hall debt is being financed out of town general, not out of fire.
Mhm.
Okay, so that wasn't the original plan.
Well,
That's the plan we have
The intention
today.
is to transition it into fire, but like you say, that's further increasing the.
So I think that's a conversation whether we want to have it right now or we want to have it down the road, but I think we need to have full cost of fire be reflected in fire. Which could mean maybe, like, we may need to transfer, we may need to go like fire 24, town taxes 111. Like to true, like, I don't know what the final math would be, but I think like the true cost of fire now needs to, I think, should be isolated in fire, so we really understand how much the fires we're paying for, like, so we're traditionally, we don't want to have a subsidy between town general and fire. That's sort of, that we've been trying to move away from that. That's been our whole plan when we separated fire. But right now, I think now that the fire debt payments are coming through town general, we're kind of back to in between. I just think we need to at some point, we should have that conversation.
Sounds like a topic for one of our Friday morning special meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah, probably it's an appropriate topic to get a request for a report from staff. So
Yeah.
we've done estimates before and council's received them. But when we were talking about this a couple weeks back, when we were talking on the revenue side, we were saying that the challenge is projected in growth and assessment and financing costs.
fair enough.
But if a motion were done so that staff could prepare a report on, say, the next 3 years of projected fire revenues and expenditures and the necessary impacts on rates, and then that could give us something specific, then, you know, we could do that. And
Mhm.
it gives you context. I mean, the only thing is, I think we have to be careful about presenting the revenue needs in terms of the total assessed, like the revenue from assessment, town and external,
Right.
as opposed to saying the rate, because we talked about earlier, like the revenues are growing, the assessments are growing. We don't necessarily, if the rate has to meet the growth in assessment somewhere in between. And so, you know, that'll be an annual discussion for council, but a report could inform, you know, once we get the roll for next year, what did we end up relative to what we need, how much was the increase? I think that would be how to look at, especially for the external areas, like they're gonna be quite sensitive to.
Counselor Wilson.
Yes, I'm gonna ask for some clarification. I don't understand Councilor Feeney's comments that the cost of the debt for the fire hall is going into town general, because my budget, this is the older budget, is showing how much? $393,000 of debt charges, including 283 for principal installments on the fire station.
It's old version.
Sorry?
You're working off an old version of the budget.
Yeah, but is that change? Is that?
Yeah.
So
Changed a lot.
there was a change in the last version of the budget.
Oh, okay.
The difference was that we had put all of the principal and interest payments within the fire budget, which resulted in a deficit. And
Yes.
we had shown the impact of the deficit on the town operating fund. So essentially what that meant was that the town would cover the fire costs, but as a result of a deficit in fire and through the operating fund. And then what we changed it to was just to bring the fire budget into balance and move the, you know, resulting overage with respect to the station financing into the rest of where the town puts our normal capital financing, which is the dedicated capital fund stream. So it's on page 81. So that's basically saying, just like we do with other town debt, that the dedicated capital funding would less the debt payments, and that's what's left to go in reserve will be used for current year capital.
So, can I continue? So the deficit, which was $213,000, which we already understood was going to be paid out of town general, is basically the whole thing has been shifted. I understood that we didn't raise the fire rate enough to cover the full cost of the debt, the $213,000 deficit. The intention being to raise it enough next year to cover that, as I understood it. Is that correct?
Yeah, next year or over the next years, we just hadn't committed.
Yeah.
No, but I guess I'm not sure. I think what Councilor Feeney is saying, which is that we have to raise the fire rate enough to cover the $230,000 is clear.
Yeah.
It should be clear to everybody.
If you want to have a clean linkage between cost and financing.
Well, you absolutely do, of course. That's it, yeah.
And that's to avoid the town general piece, I think.
just to be. So why is that a value to us? It's a value because it gives us the ability to sit at the table with, Ian and Mary Ann and Mater Scope and say, you're at 10.5 cents. And we're at 20 cents. We're gonna net out we net out the hydrants, which is a regulated rate, which is worth 9 cents. So we're even Steven. We're paying the same rate net of hydrants as our friends in Mater's Cove and our friends in Indian Point, Oakland. I think that has value for us as a council and a community to continue to say, hey, wait, so you're not subsidizing us, we're not subsidizing you. We're paying 9 cents of the 20 cents is for the hydrants, fair, and that's something we can't control. That's a regulated rate, fair enough. But what I'm suggesting is our 11 cents is insufficient to cover these payments. And if you look back, and this isn't a matter of, oh, well, the fire hall was more expensive. This really isn't necessarily a challenge with the fire hall financing. The problem is the fire hall operating costs. That is what's gone through the roof. No one would have thought 4 years ago we were going to have a $56,000 electrical bill or a $10,000 IT allocation. I mean, the costs of running it are just a lot higher than we expected.
Who does the IT for the fire hall? MJSC?
It's just an allocation.
Okay.
It's just
yeah.
but I mean, when you look at the year over year for the fire department operating expense, so that's really what we're covering. Because we normally would have used that operating budget to fund the debt, but we're not. We're using it to fund janitorial services and all the things we need. I'm not saying they're not real. I'm just saying they're a lot higher than it was. But just from my perspective, because I think this has value. When someone says, wow, you guys built a very expensive fire department, the fire department was really, it will cost us $6.5 million to build the fire hall now. It's just that the operating costs aren't lining up with our expectation because of fuel costs, and power costs, and janitorial costs. Anyway, you know the story, the budget's well noted there.
So if we isolate the hydrant piece, are you proposing that if we have an increase on our fire rate to accommodate the rest?
Well, it's more than 4 cents is the point.
Yes, but would you see Indian Point and Mater's Cove having the same kind of increase as we would have with that hydrant piece isolated?
Well, I'd suggest that as we collaborate with those other jurisdictions about the appropriate fire rate, our ability to persuade them that it's fair for their fire rate to increase as well is much easier that's a much easier story to tell when we have it when the rates are well understood. So I would say all the rates for Indian Point, Oakland, and Home Bay, and Mater's Cove, probably need to go up a bit as well, but they don't, but it needs to be viewed as being fair.
Yes.
And I think, Dylan, I'm not sure when the Mater's Cove Fire Commission, sometime in the next couple of weeks, I believe.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. So, I do think it would be wise for us to say, hey, listen, maybe a half a cent increase for the next 3 years is probably what we need you to contribute.
Yeah, I think at
Something
this
like
point,
that.
all we can contribute is, or all we can get across their bow basically is that next year, we really are
We're coming.
expecting something.
Right.
And we'll let you know in lots of time. And then that's where I think it is reasonable to do a request for staff to report about projections for the fire rate now, because we do want to have that in the fall and be providing lots of notice. And so, yeah, I think, we
I think
take a
that's,
motion on that now and save the larger conversation.
yeah, I think that's why, I'm open-minded about exploring differentiated fire rates for commercial versus residential too. So, like, if you think about the cost of the facilities, what would council think about, say a 23 cent rate for commercial, a 21 cent rate for, a delineated rate between commercial and residential. And the idea is just about the contribution to the pie in a similar percentage as where we've been historically. Like the historic contributions of the commercial base towards fire protection is a lot higher than it is right now, Because all of the commercial assessments have come way down during COVID. And we're all being backstopped by the anomaly of the new seniors complex, which is, obviously making the commercial base high, but if you really look at everything else, net of that out, the percentage contribution historically was 30% of the town revenue. Right now, it's 18%. So that for a million reasons that we don't need to get into, but essentially around the income methodology for the commercial tax assessment. Anyway, point is, is that an idea that anybody would be willing to explore? And if there's no support at the council, well, then it's a moot point, we can move on. But personally, I think it would be wise for us to at least evaluate it about what the virtues of it, and because we just want a fair allocation of cost, that's all we're really looking for.
And just quickly on that, to the note that Councillor Wilson made, so I was just doing the quick math on, so the total cost of servicing the debt, principal and interest in respect to the fire station, excluding the hall, I like to call it the fire station, so people don't start to think we're talking about the hall being in the rates, was 293,610 in this year.
Mhm.
The way we split it was 166,336 in the fire budget. So fire rates are covering is roughly 47%, or 57% rather. And then the remaining 127,274, or about 43%, that's being picked up by the town in this year, by Town General this year.
Mhm.
And then that's the amount we're trying to shift over in the next year or two. And the question is just, where does assessment growth meet changes in the rate? And if we have a motion to do a study on that, we can come back with some, but that'll be for, informing next year's budget, basically.
So I'll second your motion if you.
To ask for a rate study,
It's effectively, I guess, a miniature rate study,
It's a fire rate study,
but just from our staff. I
yeah,
think.
internal.
And then my assumption is that some of that conversation will be in closed session.
Yeah, we'll sort it out. There's certain things we shouldn't.
I mean, I do agree, Dylan, that our costs are generally going to be fixed going forward, with the exception of the pumper. But we've made big investments, but now they're in the rearview mirror, and the cost, other than inflation factors, but we're generally fixed. But I have no doubt that the fire department's going to need more equipment, different equipment, evolving equipment. Anyway, so I'd move that council request of staff a fire rate study and report back to council with a kind of a multi-year view of where fire rates need to be to support the underlying capital investments and operating expenses for fire services.
Okay, seconded by the deputy mayor. On the question? You had that quizzical look on your face?
I'm always thinking.
No questions? All in favor? The motion is carried.
If there's no further comment, I would assume that's the end of the fire budget.
I just said that question. In our revenues, is the new seniors complex included in that? Because that alone, at 20 cents, is going to bring a fair amount of revenue in for the fire service.
The simple answer is the current year value is, but the building's not fully valued. So that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure to say, it's not just about the rate,
No.
it's about the total assessment.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll look with.
The revenue for fire services in version .9 is not up to date. I think .10 will be up to date based on the 200 million. I think that's right? The version 9 is still based on the old assessment, not the 200 million. Pretty sure. The 386 should be 420,
Yeah, that makes sense.
right? Anyway, there'll be version 10 will have an updated number of revenue, and it's 50, 60 grand higher than is in
In there.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes,
It
yeah,
should,
I know exactly
right?
what you're talking- Yeah, yeah.
It's just, it's still not enough, I guess is the
No.
point, still not
Yeah.
enough.
It was pulling the wrong.
Dylan, the point was that the $200 million of assessment multiplied by the 20 cents is 420 versus 386.
Oh, okay.
That's the only.
Yeah, I was pulling from the formula above,
There,
so
okay.
yeah,
No,
so
that's
it's
great.
419,984 is
Well,
what the-
Are we, and I know we talk about this every year, are we allowed to go back to the URB around the hydrant study? And I know it's just robbing Peter to pay Paul, but I'm
Well,
curious
We're not
about,
only required to, we will have to.
Are we
Like,
al-
when we do our water rates, we'll have to consider whether the.
Are we
fair
allowed?
allocation.
yeah, are we allowed to go back and say, hey, listen, instead of 180, we want to do 150? No, I know that doesn't make anything easier on the water utility. I'm just kind of curious if. we're
Yeah, I
allowed to-
mean, you know, we have to ask our water rate consultant to substantiate that, and if it's a reasonable argument they feel could be made in front of the board, then we could, if we go to the board, we could include that in our. Yeah, but I mean, you know, the cost will go up overall, so it's more about the differential increase than it is about changing, like, we're not gonna drop it from what it is. But if the rest of the rates were to go up by 10%, and that wasn't, that will shift the balance a little.
Not suggesting we do that, I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
And there's a public process, so if anybody's, you know, we'd have to have a hearing and.
Could I ask a question on the IT? I know it's barely decent amount of money. What's included in that?
You're back into the operating budget, so the IT is.
Oh, for the fire department, just the IT.
Yeah, I know, we were only on the fire capital, but I don't mind talking. So the IT is, like we said, is we take the full cost of our IT services to the town. And then it's allocated based on users. So the inclusion in there is the supply of the equipment, you know, any servicing on the equipment, replacement of equipment. The email accounts, tech support associated with email accounts, the Wi-Fi in the building, tech support associated with the Wi-Fi in the building. So it's basically just all of the IT services that they get. We don't have costing for all of them. What we have is we have a weight that every department gets based on the number of user accounts. So the fire department's weighting is 4 out of about 30, and it was 28 or 30, so it's about 4 out of 30. So that's, I think, a pretty reasonable representation. That's how we do it. So if everybody's going on the fire capital, water utility capital, wastewater utility capital, and or wastewater cap, it's not utility, wastewater capital, and electrical capital remain. Cognizant of time, we probably at some point might run out and want to save a little time for grants and or the closed session.
Mhm.
We have at least another hour. I'll keep going into water. People are okay. I think water could be quite quick, but you know, with fire, we had a really good conversation about the money behind all these things. So the items themselves might be simple, but the context for their funding is complex. So with respect to water, we've got a couple things.
Can I pause you for it?
Yeah.
Just ask a question. So we still have a budget meeting saved for next week, right?
Tentatively, I think we need to confirm it today if
Yeah.
we're going with the 18th, but we had talked about it.
So I know we go into the conversations and say, well, this is not supposed to take too long, and it takes an hour. So cognizant of that, I am anxious for us to make decisions around the grants and the subsidies, and since you have the next meeting, we can do those capital pieces for those 2 meetings. Because
I think that makes a lot of sense.
session.
My suggestion, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, would be, we've talked about the water utility and electrical utility being the main things for next meeting. Like, that's what, we haven't really had a lot of discussion on those. So if we take the water utility capital and the electric capital, since those are entirely separated from town general, then maybe what we could do is, if we could talk about wastewater and stormwater capital now, and then call it for the capital conversation and move into grants.
That sounds.
I'd really like to talk about the wastewater and stormwater, because some of these projects tie into the transportation above, and we kind of were like, everybody's good, but I just want to make sure everybody actually is good on like the Fairmont and Pine Grove conversation, for example. So is that okay? We'll see.
I'm good with that. I don't know the rest of the
Okay. Wastewater, stormwater?
Yes.
Jumping to number 130 on page 113,
Mhm.
wastewater and stormwater. So we've got standard things that are always here. So you'll see some of those like new services. Well, that's really just a pass through. People pay us mostly. We have some work, they have some work. We do what needed only when there's a new customer. But I wanted to stress there are a number of things we didn't get done in prior years because unfortunately we had a bunch of staff turnover, water, wastewater. And now we've got staff that their feet up and do them, and they're excited to get moving, and they feel we can accomplish most of these things, at least in this year. So lift station is a carry forward of a pump replacement that is needed, but we keep it limping along, but you're supposed to have redundancies in the system. SCADA for the wastewater treatment facility. So basically we try to have automation to monitor all the facilities when we're not present, but the wastewater facility is not currently hooked onto that. And we've been planning for several years to complete that transition.
What's the acronym again?
SCADA, jeez. I've been using the acronym for so many years. I don't know if that- You happen to, you might know it.
I can make one up if you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's so well used as an acronym, I can't,
Supervisory control and data acquisition,
I
Yes.
guess so.
sounds good.
Basically,
pretty-
it's
that
it's an
sounds
automated
good,
system that
actually.
monitors
Yeah.
constant things. And so Scott can see, like, even on his phone, if there's an error with anything, so it's basically just like not having to go physically inspect things, yeah. So, and that's just been, we have a single contractor who does that work, so lining it up and having our staff work with them, hopefully this year. Security cameras is another one, I already talked about this, but no, actually, maybe it's the first time this is coming up this year, so. We've had an intention, and I think it's very reasonable to have security cameras on fenced properties, places where you're not supposed to be there. So these are secure water treatment, water pumping, wastewater treatment facilities. And unfortunately, with the cost of everything, the budget we had last year wasn't enough. We went out through Canoe for, like, we're allowed to go to standard procurement. We went to the security people. We got great quotations, people looking at everything and what can you do? And Jonathan and I looked at how can we get it down to like the lowest level, and it was still more than what we had budgeted. So 6,000 would cover us for the wastewater. So that's basically just at the wastewater facility. And there's a similar item for water, which would be the 2 water facilities. So I know we've had a lot of conversation about monitoring and public areas, but these are behind the fence secure facilities. So does anyone have any question about that one?
Thank you for explaining that. But I was not about to ask, are we sliding?
I'm not
stuff
trying
back?
to
Yeah.
relitigate that conversation. But I do think we should continue with this plan.
No, would that, sorry, I jumped in without.
No, go ahead, sir.
Will that in many ways, or will we see another camera cost when you look at the electric utility because of the solar garden?
So yeah, I don't think there is one in there. It would just be part of the solar garden project, but there is a plan to have one additional camera location in respect to the solar garden.
So why wouldn't we sneak both of them into the solar garden project?
Since this isn't the utility project, we certainly could do that. We certainly could do that. I would still say you can leave it here and then I can just deal with that if I could deal with it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, get the external funding. I mean,
Yes.
if we're not maxed out on it, we might as well use it. Yeah, no, it's a good point. So the next one was Fairmont Pine Grove drainage improvement. Like this was on for last year. We already talked about it a lot under the paving. So this is a 3-part project with some sidewalk, some underground work and some resurfacing. And it's all between the intersections of Pleasant and it's all on Fairmont and a little on the Pine Grove at the corner, from the intersections of Pleasant and Fairmont through to the end of the paved section on Fairmont. So we do the work around the area that needs the stormwater work around the corner of Pine Grove. We do the new sidewalk on the little tiny stretch between Pleasant and Maple. And then we do the paving for that whole stretch from Pleasant up to the end of the paved area. So there are 3 different projects. We talked about how this could be borrowing because this is like a 15-year payback. So that is an option and that's how it's reflected here. Now that we've shifted some other things around, this is also gas tax eligible. We could decide to use the gas tax for it.
Councillor Curran.
The sidewalk, so currently the sidewalks on that section of Fairmont are on opposite sides of the street, they switch at Maple. Will it continue in that way or will it be reconfigured?
Well, I don't, if anyone's watching and you're a homeowner who lives there, don't get mad at me for saying this, but my assumption is that we would be better off having the sidewalk on the same side of the street as the rest of the sidewalk. But we'll have to look at the property lines.
Which one is sidewalk A and which one is
Okay,
sidewalk
sorry,
B?
so switching the small section we're talking about working on, which is just between Pleasant and Maple,
From the
to
west
be on the
block
same side as the rest of the sidewalk running up the street.
to go to the
Yeah,
east
so I know,
side.
because it's on the other side running down, but the down part, none of this project is from Pleasant down.
Right, I
So, yeah.
understand, yeah.
So I think it just will be easier to do.
But then it still has the same problem but it does have crosswalks.
Changing.
When it hits
it's a
Pleasant, it's
yeah.
still up. on both
It's
sides.
slightly better, but it's, yeah,
But
has its
there are
own set of
crosswalks
issues.
at Naples too.
Yeah, but the visibility is better with the stops, there's a stop sign.
Especially with that hedge.
So we're moving, so we're
Yeah.
moving the sidewalk from Bill Lewis's side to the other side?
That's theoretically what I expect will be the best approach. We haven't done the engineering.
Yeah, and currently we have to look at the property.
So
Yeah,
Bill asked me last night, he says, I'm very appreciative of all the work, don't hurt my hedge. Last night, when we were at the bar. So anyways, okay.
So we might be giving
It's
his
like,
hedge.
I was reading this is Bush had come back to haunt me in my sleep. All I wanted.
Is there not a policy that addresses the hedge issue?
It's a 3-corner triangle visibility issue.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
issues. The current sidewalk is too narrow, so it's not just that there's a hedge. Like the sidewalk is not regular, it doesn't even meet any kind of standards. It's like 3 feet wide.
Easier to protect the hedge if you're not redoing the sidewalk. on
This
that
is,
side.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to consider putting it on the other side. It really, I don't want it to. If the neighbor on the other side were to feel this was entirely about a hedge, they would be misinterpreting.
Fair enough.
So, yeah. But it's a big project and we will have the next version, like if I suggest moving it to gas tax versus board, but we'll want to talk just to make sure in the final version, everybody's clear on how we're paying.
Because the neighbor on the other side does have a bush right almost to the road, so he's not know what that moves probably there, so.
No way to make everyone happy, we'll do it.
Not everybody's happy, exactly.
So the next one on here is drainage improvement main at our PS entrance. So there's a constant stormwater issue on the road in front of our PS, and Jonathan has, an idea how to best resolve that. I think it's an additional catch basin. Sorry, I let him go, but this is one thing he could have. If anyone has any question on what we would do, but I think you've all experienced that the water laying on the road there, that it is an issue. ICIP priority 2, so this is our big water wastewater on Main Street, and it just basically like the engineering component of the water component of that project, so or of the wastewater component of that project. So basically this is like half of the current year engineering cost is what's in there, and this is grant funded at 73%, so that was great. And just a reminder, my intention is to stop at the budget, not to let our budget start to become 30%. 40%. In the past, we've done a scope of work, and if our budget came to be much more than we thought at the Pleasant Street one, I think Jim said it was 42% in the end. It was supposed to be 27, so we swallowed the difference. I'm going to lower the scope to kind of just keep us at what I mean, when you get into construction, you have issues come up, we can't deal with that. But in terms of the contracting part, I'm going to try to lower the scope to match what we got funding for. Next one is service extensions. There was a question on this before. So stovepipe, there's a water and a wastewater portion. So we have currently three properties on stovepipe. There's one that's serviced off stovepipe. There's one that's new and unserviced, and there's another one that's serviced off of an easement. The new one that is being constructed, they were anticipating to connect to the main on stovepipe, which serves the one that's already served. But when Scott and I went looking at this, we previously, years ago, some people who've been here might remember, the thought was, and we did engineering designs at the time, to actually replace the service that's currently there with a new one, because the service that's currently there is already problematic. So we wanted to take the opportunity to put in a new service that will serve the existing property, the new property, and potentially in the future, if there's any subdivision, with potentially a couple more locations that could be served. So this is basically a replacement of what's there, but also, planning ahead to have the capacity. The size of the pipe is the least cost. We're digging it up, right? So we would go up to another size in case there's ever additional development, just so we don't have to deal with that again. Scott doesn't think it will cost this much. This was the budget the engineer attached to it, so we'll see when we get to it, but.
Does that include water or just the wastewater?
This is the wastewater portion, so there's a similar.
The water portion.
Amount of water, yeah, but like I said, I mean, I hope it will be less, we think it should be less. It's not a paved road, the quotes assume that you're dealing with like a repaving of a road, but we're not, so. But anyway, it is a fair cost, and I do want to acknowledge it. I think it's our obligation to have serviceable lines, and these houses will have to use wells otherwise, but.
So I'll just go ahead. So you mentioned a new property there, and I'm just wondering about the potential for development up at the top of Stovepipe Lane, and where is the new property?
Yeah, so Stovepipe was originally, this is way before my time, but my understanding Stovepipe was originally converted to a town road in order to create street frontage. It was part of the rationale, just like we have in other places in town where people ask about subdivision. So right at the top is a very large property that's been cleared. If you go look, it's been cleared. So those are the folks that are, their foundations, you know, sited out, they're ready to go. The properties on the other side of the road have room, or the lane, have room for subdivision. Unfortunately, and I wasn't here when we did this, we, for some reason, cut off the end of the road in such a way that there is gonna be, in order for the back part of the adjacent property, there is gonna be a discussion between those two property owners. I feel like maybe the town crews all the time, maybe we tried and for whatever reason we couldn't, it was 20 years ago. But I know there's at least one subdivision that is possible and the other one would require the neighbors to collude a little bit, but there's room, there's certainly room for developable lots. I just wish we'd push the street another 60 feet.
So all this is important because of well, for a variety of reasons, but one of them is the potential for development and increased.
And it would be
residential
a
property.
replacement of a thing, and we might say, oh, it's $5,000 less, just replace what's there at the size that's there, but just the recommendation is, let's go up a little bit, just in case there's additional need.
So your point, Dylan, is in a perfect world, Stovepipe would be extended all the way to the trail.
Well, I would not go that far. There's two other pieces of property that are not street fronting that could be accessed if it went even 60 feet further than it does. But that's the piece of property that is being developed is the one that it would be going on. And for whatever reason, we didn't.
Excellent.
We didn't do that 20 years ago.
A couple of questions. I think one on the Stovepipe piece is, will there be work conversation between town council and property owners to make that road go further?
I mean, I thought I'd raise it informally,
Yeah.
but you know, I don't expect there to be a lot of excitement around it. So I guess it's a question of like, are we at this point, you know, willing to put any kind of price tag or anything? I think it's a closed session conversation. If we're going to have one, but.
Second one, I missed this when we went too quickly on the wastewater rehabilitation project, and sort of wondering, this conversation has come up in the past around if we're going to do that kind of significant work, burying our electrical cables on the ground. I know we don't have the money to do that. The question I had in mind is, it with the roadwork done and the trench being done, is there a possibility where a conduit can be put in for future use, or maybe that's just crazy making?
I think it's possible, but I really don't recommend it. I mean, if we ever wanted to target an area of town, maybe because of architectural considerations or something, and said, let's just look at this area not having lines. But if the goal were to convert the whole town underground, I mean, I don't think it's a reasonable thing to even try to do.
You have to go to the regulator anyway, because
So like Edgewater Street, we made a specific decision about the prominence. We didn't want the churches to have a line in front of them.
Yeah.
And that's very reasonable. But even that is, we're talking about $120,000 project, reconduiting and stuff, so it's not small. Yeah.
Let's wait till it's all wireless.
Well, yeah.
Electricity through the air.
You have to go to the regulator, because you got the communication space for the cable and phone companies, right?
Yeah.
So overall, when we look at wastewater management kind of globally, because this is sort of a new the way we've organized these costs, this is sort of anticipates a new service. And but right now we're funding a grand total of $15,000 out of capital, gets automatically deposited into wastewater reserve, of which we're going to spend, you know, let's call it several $100,000 net of subsidies from other organizations. So what
Modest decrease to 30,000 and this increase.
fair enough.
Not exactly enough.
But I guess in a similar way that we talked about the equipment reserve contribution should be 100 a year versus 30 a year. We talked about that the last meeting. Like, I guess where my head is just trying to make sure we're all on the same page on the funding requirements for our capital program, which is now being like 30-40% of it's now being absorbed by debt payments, which is like 3 years ago, it was 10% was by debt payments. Now we're up to 30% debt payments. We've got another $70,000 from capital to fund the equipment, which we all agree is reasonable because we have about $500,000 over 5 years is generally what we need for equipment. So there's 100,000 versus 30, and here we're going from 15 to 30, but based on the math, this should be 100. I'm just, like, inevitably it comes back to we need a lot more capital. We need a lot more revenue for the capital than we ever did
In
before.
terms of waste, like theoretically, within our strategic plan and within our longer term picture, like what we were going to do is what Bridgewater did and do a study to figure out what waste, specifically just wastewater required. And
Mhm.
then consider whether there should be a more dedicated, it's like Bridgewater's created a utility. That is still, I think, the right approach for wastewater is to like structure it the same as a water utility and the rate would accommodate it and, you know, you'd have things that are existing assets users are paying for, you'd have expansions users are not paying, but you would treat it like a utility. But we're not obligated to, and so only a few municipalities, well, I wouldn't say a few, but probably about half of towns do, you know.
I like that plan, actually.
So if we treat it as a utility, Councillor Wilson will not have to pay into that, will it?
So that would be beneficial to folks like Varian or
Yeah.
or Councillor Wilson who are not on the system, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm advocating.
So
These are big numbers though, right?
I do think the context to how to pay for all this is a big question going forward. Right now, though, you'll see they're mostly down as either coming from a specific reserve or from revenue, depending on the amount. So just quickly, the PA project, these are kind of technical things. So the PA projects, this is a 3-year pilot we've been running. It's just wrapping up this year and then it'll be finished. Part of this cost would actually be the study. This was grant funded. This was not clear here. It was 50% grant funded. The study is capitalized. The study saying like, how did this all go and what's the recommendation would be capitalizable because the pilot was capital. The next one is lift station repairs. This is badly needed. It's a variety of things, you know, even the rails that the pumps run up and down, some of them have become damaged. If you can't pull a pump properly and it's flooded with sewer, it can be a very big problem and you gotta get contractors in with pumper trucks. And so before we have a crisis that necessitates pumper trucks and sewage in the harbor, we want to do repairs. So that was planned for last year. We just stalled out in terms of this construction season.
Excuse me, does that include the $12,000 for lift station repair replacement of the wharf?
Is one at
Yeah.
the top.
Oh, no. So that thing is
Sorry.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. but
Right.
no, These are the ones down in the ground,
Yep.
pushing the whole town sewer.
Yeah, got it, thank you.
And then sewer lift station, the next one, level controller certainly could have been included with the above, but just itemized, it's a small item. Lab equipment, this is a suggestion, it would allow us to do things that we currently require on sending away. It would be really handy if we could quickly check that ourselves. Stormwater management, Edgewater Street, stormwater high tide valve. So if there are questions about this, I will have him Scott, because I know this has come up for some questions before, but my understanding is there's a complex spot where before the pressurized line runs under the harbor from Edgewater to Main, which is what it does, to the lift station located on the Main Street side by the bandstand. There's a place there where we have surface water collection from storm drains on the street and sanitary, and it's there's a high tide overflow coming in the intended stormwater outflow. So the challenge here is around not letting stormwater from one place get where it isn't supposed to be, such that when it's high tide, the sanitary still works, the storm drains don't flood from the ocean doesn't back up onto the storm drains. Why this is Scott's recommendation and how it would work technically, I don't know. So if anyone has any questions, we can talk to Scott. I'll get him to address them, but there's an issue where all these different things come together at the corner of Parish and Edgewater, and it can result in flooding and in operation of our system in a way that we're trying to avoid. So this is his recommendation. So thermal imager and underground locator are also pieces of equipment that the staff are recommending. And kind of working smart, trying to make the most of our limited team and not rely on contractors. These would be shared, so this portion represents wastewater, but water and electrical also have a need for this equipment, so it's split in between, you'll see them.
So the thermal imager, is that specific to this? Because I know the ones we've been purchasing lately for the fire department aren't $5,000.
This is more than 5. I think if you look at the electrical and water, I think this is like a $15,000 item. It definitely is a specific thing. It's got something to do with being like for the electrical department. Again, I'm not the technical person. They can use it to actually look at transformers in operation and determine their efficiency somehow by the thermal imaging. And then water and wastewater have other uses, I think pumps, and so it's a diagnostic tool. But yeah, I don't know. Sure, it costs what it costs, but so these are things that are like our little wastewater reserve. Right now, I'm mostly looking at it for that type of stuff. You'll see that. So that's the water with the wastewater stormwater. So if there's no further question, wastewater stormwater, we're going to keep water and electrical to be talked about with the water and electrical operating in our next meeting. And then we can move into grants, and then I'm still hoping we might get a short closed session, even if we don't get the personnel discussion today. I'd like to raise that one contracts item because it is timely, but let's get into grants.
Good deal, man. We approve it.
So the grants section here is page 114. And what we've got is when we were doing the line item detail, you would see the total 45,566. It was basically like the last year when we did grants, I was asked to provide recommendations on everything just to kind of expedite your discussion. I'm certainly not saying do what I'm telling you here, but I was asked to provide recommendations, so that's what I did. And the total of 45,000 is already in the budget. So if you don't do 45,000 here, that's going to result in surplus monies or monies to be allocated elsewhere within the draft. And if you go more than this, we'll have to find them elsewhere in the draft. So, and I will note at the bottom, there's a small grant proposed there with the Mahone Bay Center Society. I mean, that was already, I think pretty much the motion said to put it in the budget, not to put it in the draft budget. So I think it's pretty much done. But we wanted to show it there and make sure you knew this was the balance of the account. So we'd be like draining that account. And that's not impacting the operating budget. That is only impacting the balance of the for the athletic club trust. So all that being said, I didn't think I'd run through the whole list. We've had somewhere we've received the same, we received a new application for a new thing. We've had somewhere we received a new application from an organization that previously was receiving funding. We've had somewhere we didn't receive an application. Usually, if we didn't receive an application, we're not making any recommendation. The exception to that would be if we previously agreed to a multi-year commitment. And I think the only one in that respect is the Bonnie Lee Farm. So you'll notice there's no requested amount, but my understanding at the time was it was a multi-year 250. We were doing several years of 250. So that was what they requested at the time, was it was a contribution over a couple of years. So that's why I left it at 250, if anybody's wondering. Other than that, yeah, I think probably best to just take any questions people would have. Some of these are quite complicated. Some of them are for capital expenditures, some of them aren't. We have a vested interest in, I guess, just from a capital perspective, the request from the Mahone Bay Center Society. I should just note that it's about paving parking areas of which we do own or have a, long-standing easement access right through the parking area, and a need to ensure that our sports field has parking, which under our current proposed agreement with the center, they would have to provide. So they'd be providing this area for which they're talking about paving. That's the area that we would be directing people using our sports field to park on. So just wanted to give that context.
Councillor Wilson.
With regard to paving, I have a couple of major concerns. We give an awful lot of money on an annual basis to the Mahone Bay Center anyway. But the money aside, I would suspect that paving all of that parking lot conventionally would turn the Mahone Bay soccer field into the much needed pool.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be that if we're gonna, whatever they're gonna do, that we would only get involved if they made sure it was a permeable surface. In other words, water could run through.
Okay,
Yeah, certainly stormwater considerations will be part of the design of any.
Councillor now.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of that part of it at all, paving their parking lot. We've got a lot of other paving places that we'd be putting that 22,000, we've got roads and other things that we could be putting that money into rather than putting in the center. We, like, Councilor Wilson said, we already put a lot of money into that area.
Yeah.
And, so putting $22,000 into paving that, I'm not in favor of it.
I guess what I'm a little worried about is just, and we saw that last night at the town council meeting, or maybe, maybe it was Tuesday night, about this misunderstanding that the town is an endowment of which you can come to for funding. We saw, very, excellent organizations. But, traditionally, the grant budget was for small community organizations to come for small allocations for little odds and ends, like a couple $100 for Bayview and a couple $100 to run, one of the festivals. We're now seeing grant requests for thousands of dollars come in on a regular basis. And we're talking a $50,000 grant program. Like when I joined council, the grant program was $6,000. We're now talking $50,000 in grants. And that's no commentary about the positive attributes of the request. It's just, you've got 485 taxpayers paying $50,000 to grants to organizations, some of which are, I'm worried about just the scale of the requests. And I'm wondering, is this just a one-year anomaly and we're going to get back down to something more historically in line with the, 15, even last year was 20,000, like, okay, maybe I can get my head around that, but $50,000, that also doesn't include the, $11,000 we give Mahone Bay Center in taxes and the fire and other organizations like the museum, and it's really adding up. And I don't know how sustainable it is to, and I don't honestly know, as I've mentioned in my correspondence, like, I'm worried about the idea of taxation and then donation. When some of these organizations can seek donation from the tax base individually, at least they get a charitable donation receipt. So, I love Catholic Charities as much as the next person, but St. Vincent de Paul, I'm sorry. My mother and I can fund them directly. We don't need our taxes to be used to fund them. I see VON's off the list this year. That would fall into a similar category. Bonnie Lee Farm, the para hockey. Like, these are not community events. These are charities that get funded through charitable donations from the tax base versus through taxation and donation. So I know we don't have a lot of time this morning to think about this, but I do really think we have to figure out on a percentage basis what the capital budget, what the grant budget should be on a percentage of overall revenue, and then allocate it out that way and come up with some kind of policy that's logical.
You need a maximum grant
Based
level or
on
something?
percentage of revenue somehow.
Councillor Carter.
Well, I totally agree with what Councillor Feeney has said. And his last comment pertained to something that I wanted to say, which is to suggest that we refer the grants policy to the Policy and Strategy Committee for review and to update it. Because I think that we could fine tune it for, along the lines perhaps that Councillor Feeney has suggested. And in relation to the request from the Mahone Bay Center about the paving, one of the arguments that they made was that is, what's the word I wanted, the right of way that permits access by safety vehicles. In which case, if we ever wanted to consider it, why would it be in grants and not under protection? Protective services. So it would make it easier to think about than as a grant, a $22,000 grant, for me anyway. But I would like to make the motion that we do refer the grants policy to the Policy and Strategy Committee for consideration to update.
Councillor Longstrop seconds the motion. On the question, CAO?
Just, I think it's a good direction to go in, and I think it's worth reviewing the policy after many years, and typically people come to us and say, I'm interested in if the town would be willing to do this, and I say, well, we have a grants window, so, you know, put it in, and we'll see.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know how to direct those types of inquiries, and then I just wanted to point out that the heritage grant policy actually does set a cap. And so like, the idea of putting a financial cap on the grants in policy is, we've done that in another case. And we should be clear not to accidentally complain, because that is the grant in here.
I would also like it when we do review this, consider twice a year to break it down, because often there's things that pop up through the year that people need funding for an event or something that is community-based, but we've already spent our grant money. So maybe reserved for half the year and half the year to be considered, because I think we lose out on many social and very good community opportunities because we're only, you know, we don't get that March 30th cutoff.
And that would be one of the considerations that the PNS would
Yes.
consider, okay? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I do agree with everything that's been said, and probably just in observation and looking at this, I think 28,000 out of this grants budget would not be there in subsequent years. It's one time, so capital requests, and I do agree, it's 45,000 annually is not something that the town can afford. And I know I have a conflict of interest in this particular one, but I think that like my home base center and the MBU piece, if they are not in this budget, then we would be talking 20. Similar to what's been requested, so to speak. So hopefully we can get to a place where we can agree on a sum and have that distributed to make things easier.
Which items you want to agree on a sum?
No, I'm saying, I was just describing that if those two items, the home base center and the MBU grants are not in there, the sum total will
Oh,
come
I
down
appreciate
significantly. Yeah.
Yeah, 15,000.
Councillor Wilson.
With regard to that, I did have a question that maybe the deputy mayor could help with, which is the Mahoma United request for $6,200. Is that for the creepy crawling mower?
What we asked them to do, to separate.
Yeah, because in the
Yeah.
budget, it's 6,500.
Yeah.
And again, I will recommend, given that, significant increase we've seen in the capital allocation for things to cut grass. $15,000 mower and a $9,000 trailer all around and so on and so forth, that we simply opt to cut the grass for them on a schedule to be determined by Mahoma United.
I noticed, just as an aside, that last weekend, MBU was petitioning folks to come and lend a hand to help the mow in anticipation of a game on the weekend. But if we were doing it on a regularly scheduled basis with town staff, then that would ease that problem for them. I know you.
I think we talked about
He's
this
gonna
already
be
once this
pushing the
week.
mower.
We're talking about it
Yeah.
again, but I think there's a really strong rationale for the booking and usership and maintenance to be linked, and I think we've talked about it a lot. I really strongly don't believe that Public Works can and should provide the type of recreational service that we're talking about, and that's the whole reason we've approached this the way we have. So this wouldn't be the time or place to kind of reopen that whole conversation, but if there's a feeling we need to, I think we better refer it to an upcoming discussion.
Okay.
Because we already talked about it once this week.
I think actually I like the clean break with the MBC and the club taking full responsibility for the maintenance, obviously with our money. But I don't want Jonathan I wouldn't want Jonathan and the town staff to be burdened by that function. We've outsourced that function to this group. So I don't think we want, so I take the point, what we just spent $15,000 a mower. I mean, absolutely, that it's a legitimate point. I understand where you're coming from. I do think this is an unusual circumstance in we've passed an arrangement last evening, or it's about to be signed by the mayor, about the maintenance and lawn care. And that's a separate distinct responsibility than the budget. How the Mahone Bay Center wants to facilitate that, whether they're going to get volunteers, that's their problem. Parallel to that, we do have a request to fund their solution to this, which is their low maintenance lawn management solution. Their drone, their lawn drone. So great. So I guess for mine is, I'd kind of like to see them have an opportunity. It seems to me, based on Tim's commentary, that was that seemed very efficient to me, because I think we would burn through much more than $6,000 on lawn care if we on town staff time. So I do think these are distinct issues. I'm okay funding the lawnmower, but that doesn't necessarily mean Councillor Wilson's not correct. He's right. I'm hoping this lawnmower drone lasts a long time. I think it'll last 7-8 years, it's supposed to be. So I think $1,000 to mow the soccer field a year seems like a pretty good deal to me.
Okay,
Well,
Councillor Carter or Councillor Hill?
I'd just like to go back to my earlier suggestion that the paving project go to protective services. I mean, is that a reasonable thing to do? And
I might have missed what?
oh, well, the request from the Mahone Bay Center Society to contribute $22,000 to their paving. And their argument was, one of their arguments was that it's providing that right of way across the property for emergency vehicles.
Oh, I'd forgotten that rationale. Well, I wouldn't put a lot of stake in that
I would put it
rationale.
Emergency vehicles aren't going to do that.
Well,
The access across the property is technically for our fields, like, because we have a property that's landlocked there.
I thought it had to do with emergency services. Maybe I'm imagining
It
that.
wouldn't be our responsibility to keep it open for emergency services. I mean, there may be
Okay.
I don't want to say there isn't a practice of emergency services wanting any, I don't know.
Just think on that part a little bit, unless the fire is at the center, our fire department would never use that as an access. To go around the other
Come
side.
up School Street
We have-
or
we have-
Pond Street.
We have.
No, but they're talking about, that's what the area they're talking about is the School Street entrance.
Yeah, but that's going through the center. We would never go through there with an emergency vehicle.
They
Whether it
wouldn't
was
come in
paved or
off
whether it wasn't.
the back street and go.
Oh, you'd come from Fairmont.
We'd come up Fairmont and up there, and we come up Pleasant to Fairmont.
And then in the back entrance.
I'm saying, we would use that if the fire was at the center. That's the only time we would ever use that
Okay.
in there.
What about a heart attack in the middle of the field?
But so I guess that was my point about, like, it's field access, so it includes emergency services, but it also just includes people coming to the field.
Okay, I guess I'm not getting the point across. I do see that there is some merit in the idea, if we are using it for emergency services, that why wouldn't we consider putting some portion of their request into protective services rather than under grants? For this year. That's
I mean, it's
the way my brain's operating.
It's all coming out of the same.
Yes, it's true.
Councillor Hill.
My understanding of this paving is only for the side parking lot. It's not for to do the access road around or anything like that.
Yeah, my
Side
understanding
parking.
is it would only come up to the bottom of the, like, we go up.
Rise.
Yeah, because of the back side parking lot, so that's why, I cannot see the town taxpayers having to put the bill for that.
Do you have a comment?
Yes, so, I mean, we can talk about this till the cows come home, kind of thing, and also.
Better be home 45 minutes.
45 minutes. What do we feel ready to support? What don't you feel ready to support? And maybe we can.
Item by item.
Yeah, item by item. And Dylan, isn't there some interconnect work between the solar garden and the substation? Like isn't there some pole work and some line work and like, are there any synergies on the solar garden project that would also accommodate paving on across the interconnect there?
I don't think
You know,
so. We've already done all the work. We took advantage. We did vegetation work and we did other stuff that we could consider, but the route that it takes doesn't overlap the parking lot at all, so there's really no connection. So
I think the deputy mayor is on the right track. Why don't we just go through these and
Should I, how do you want to do this, Chair? Should I go item by item or what do you? Like somebody's gonna
Yeah,
ask.
Well,
Mayor,
why don't
you want to ask?
let's just go look through the list, Mayor, and.
Okay, Lady Bay Trail Association,
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, the full 1,000?
yeah.
Oh, I would go 500 or. Yeah.
They didn't specify.
250 or
so-
something.
Okay.
No, they gave us a pretty big range of, but.
$500,
$500,
Counselor?
okay.
500 is
Fine.
amended to 500?
500?
Yep,
I thought
500.
It is.
We talked on the stop sign. Which one of you guys is writing this down? You just-
I am.
Bonnie Farm,
Yeah, that's.
Funded.
Yeah.
Right?
Blue Nose Coastal Action Foundation,
No, and I'm the treasurer.
Not at all, not
Okay,
at
so I
all.
say no.
Okay,
It's a charitable organization, they can get their
They
own
get
money.
their, they get their.
Okay, with that-
the FCM Advocacy Fund,
yes.
No,
What is that?
It's regulatory, where we
No,
have,
we're not obligated.
We're not
Jeff.
obligated.
It is, it's a national initiative encouraging participation in local government. So they ask municipalities, will you all contribute to support participation in local government? I think it speaks specifically to people who are underrepresented traditionally.
But why is it in the grants rather than in the government services?
I really don't know. This predates me. I don't know why this was done.
Right,
So
so if-
maybe we could just say, let's keep paying $60, but let's stop including it in the grants.
I
and
would
we'll
be
do
happy
that.
with that, because if we go with Councillor Feeney's
It
suggestion.
won't fit our policy eventually.
No,
Yeah.
but if it goes, right, if we decide to have the grant budget as a percentage of our operating, our revenues or whatever. Then that's better off somewhere else.
fair enough.
okay.
We wouldn't even talk about it. We were just paying it out legislators.
FDM $60 from government services.
I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, fair enough,
Right.
yes.
The deputy mayor,
I think, so I would never support it, but I'm okay you moving somewhere else, so I don't see this.
Councillor Wilson,
I agree with Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, okay.
Hide it somewhere.
let's go to, there's nothing here for First Responders Day. Chamber of Commerce, Tourism,
Yes.
Father Christmas.
I have a question if I may. Don't we at somewhere, or have we at some time given a blanket amount to the?
And let me sort of-
Comments?
We used to, we stopped doing that. We can go back to doing that, but maybe let's leave that for the grants conversation, like since we're talking
Oh,
about.
when we're doing the policy.
I mean, yeah,
Okay.
because we're back to this is what we do now. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the 900 for the chamber,
Mhm.
for Father Christmas,
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. The flower baskets, 2,500,
Yes,
okay. 125 for the Heritage Boatyard Co-op,
yes,
Sure.
okay,
Yeah, I think she can.
yes.
okay?
garden tour.
If anybody doesn't want, so shout it out. Heritage Property Grant Fund,
There's nothing.
Yeah, no rollover.
nothing, okay. Mayor Home Bay Founders Society, Home and Garden Tour.
I'd support that.
Yes.
If they're resuming that after COVID.
Yeah, they do it by video
Yeah.
now, don't they? They don't.
Yeah,
I believe they're having it on
On
June
the
tenth.
ground this year?
Yeah,
June
June
10th.
10th.
Good,
Yeah.
okay.
That weekend, 10th, 11th.
That seems to be a popular weekend. Mahone Bay Center Society, 22,000?
No,
No,
No?
Yes, for me.
Okay, one for the deputy mayor.
Sorry, Mayor, so this is so that this is a no on the 22,000 for the paving.
We're not contributing for the paving, yes.
Do people want to consider a smaller contribution or not? Would that
I don't think we should be putting.
Well, they've had $1 million in grants over 20 years. Why they haven't figured out to pave the parking lot is.
I mean, I will say that there's accessibility rationale to paving the accessible spaces that we want to see adjacent to the track. So if we were just hypothetically looking at a lower amount, we could say, you know, with respect to the fact that the town wants to see accessible spaces paved as opposed to gravel, because that is the best practice, we would contribute 5,000 or whatever, you know, but that's would be up to somebody around the table here. So I just wanted to note that we do kind of have a, but we could also just come along later and say, do you mind if while we're doing some paving, we throw some pavement down here? And
Is
they
there
probably
any
would be happy to see that.
accessibility monies available for that project?
The portion of it we'd be talking about, I wouldn't really bother to try to go through a grant application or
Okay.
anything to. 'cause,
Okay.
yeah,
I mean, the funding that we got 207,000.
could make the case, but I think it'd be a good case to pay for the entire parking lot on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay, so. No 22,000, or do we want to consider a lesser amount?
No.
No,
No.
Counselor Curtis, no.
Well, I'd consider a lesser amount if it was an easy way to do that, but it sounds too complicated, so no.
Sort of, Council Carter, if we have some synergy with some other paving project and we can throw in.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not for the 22,000.
Yeah, I would say a lesser amount or go with another way of providing things.
Okay, or no, you,
No, I already said yes to 2,000.
okay, needs to- and I'm,
Yeah.
okay, so it looks like a no.
Let's go.
Music Bay or Mahone Bay Music Association, this is the,
Yeah.
the bandstand projects.
That was-
And they have the concerts in the
The
summertime.
pre-series.
And we need it for the ACOA funding.
This-
We also
yeah.
get the synergy.
And this year, I think there's Canada Day in there too. I think it was.
Yeah.
So are
Para,
we looking at the full 3,000? I can't remember the details of what that 3,000 supports now.
I think it's
It's a large
for
amount.
entertainment.
It's 12
I think it's
weekends.
all artist fees. because
Yeah.
they don't-
Well, it's artist fees, right. Artist fees, right. and-
Yeah.
thank you.
12 weekends.
Thank
I, I think it's a very worthy thing to
Yeah.
support.
Like $200 a week, right?
Okay, para hockey championships, I thought that was canceled,
Yeah. I think so.
or is it back on
I thought it
again?
was.
I don't think it's in this area.
It was
Yeah,
supposed
I think
to-
we're a no on
It's in Bridgewater.
Is it in Bridgewater
Yeah.
this year?
Bridgewater.
Yeah, I think no on that, Carolyn.
Okay, no it is,
And,
no on the para hockey championships.
and I think, Mayor, I think the time for St. Vincent de Paul is passed as well. Mayor.
No,
No,
on
this-
St. Vincent de Paul. Mahone Bay United Soccer Association, that's the lawnmower that we've already said yes to, I think.
We have.
Well, we recommend, we asked them to,
Actually said yes.
we asked them to apply.
Yeah.
We asked them to apply.
I'm a yes on that.
Yeah, I'd be yes. on that.
Counselor now?
So one.
I'm sort of on the
He's
fence
huffing
side.
here.
You know, I'm just not sold on the idea that that mower's gonna work. From what I've been hearing and finding out that, you know, if there's anything on there, it's gonna go around it instead of over it.
Is this a straight old mower and I can set it on its way and come back in 2 hours?
It's a Roomba. It just cuts grass.
Roomba more, it's used a
Do
lot.
we really, do we really want that going on a town field when there's kids out there?
No, there wouldn't be kids when it's being mowed.
It would work at night or within.
It's got a little machine.
dusk hours. It would.
Again, it's
you know,
their responsibility.
But in terms of can it do the job, this is a perfect environment for an auto mower. isn't
So
it?
I would say this, Richard, just say no, don't feel guilty.
But no, I have a question. Does somebody have to be there to monitor it when it's being used? No.
No,
Okay,
But-
Counselor Carter
This is such an informal meeting and everybody's talking at the same time and back and
It's
forth.
Thursday morning, the sun,
Yeah.
you know.
It's a part of it that I don't. So my question is, the image of the Roomba out there all by itself with nobody supervising, is it subject to theft by any
It's
chance?
just.
No, they could have it. They're too
You'll
heavy.
only pick it up
I have
once.
no idea what it looks like. I have
600 pounds.
I've only seen advertisements for the interior ones.
Yeah.
so I would say that shouldn't be for council to worry about. Right?
We give a grant and they buy it.
We're giving a
So not
grant.
my
I
problem.
don't want to
Yeah,
micromanage
and-
these guys.
and if MBU decides to go and get something that will create a lot of danger. That's
So-
why there's insurance.
Okay,
We shouldn't start using it until the agreement's in place.
If it works, we'll get one for Jubilee ball field.
Exactly.
If it works.
It's a pilot project.
Yeah, or yes, rather, okay, good, good for the mower. Legends, T-ball,
Zero.
nothing,
Sorry,
social, sexual health
sorry,
society.
I'd like to come back to that.
Yeah,
Which one?
The T-ball piece.
they haven't asked for anything.
Oh, I guess
They
it was-
asked,
yeah, I
just
guess
that
they did, yeah,
they
sorry.
didn't
I
specify.
misspoke, the
Yeah.
next one's not requested, this one was unspecified, so yeah.
So,
sorry, yeah.
so I think we should give them $500.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
500 or 250?
That's what-
Yeah,
same as we did last.
Right, and apparently it was a very successful program.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, 250 for,
No,
or 500 for T-ball,
Mhm.
all right?
We've knocked plenty off, so we're still well below where we started. yeah.
Legion Remembrance Day,
Yes,
It's not
so 200.
It's not, well, I mean, I guess
We'll find-
this might be one of those ones we just look at, why is this here? Because if this is just something I don't know, if this is for reads and stuff, and we just spend that money,
I would think towards the
Well, I think-
reception.
I think
like-
it was I think this year-
On that,
I think this year with the 100-year cenotaph anniversary, we probably will do something to commemorate that, would be my guess. But we can,
we already have, we decided not to leave it.
fair enough, but we can, I mean, we can use it, leave it in the, I assume we're gonna have some unallocated portion left to draw upon.
Actually, I forgot to note at the bottom, there's $2,000 that's
So-
proposed as unallocated.
Yeah,
I mean,
So it can fall in there.
we can't apply for them, they have to apply themselves, so
Yeah.
0 for now, and we'll have some in the unallocated.
Social Sexual Health Society.
I don't think that's part of the town mandate.
Well,
We
they
would
did
benefit.
specify that they provide services clearly at the Bayview School. To the education services, so I'm a little mixed on this one.
And also,
I'm okay with 500.
isn't that with the special nurse also, so that if you have a victim of sexual violence, that they work with them at the hospital?
Oh.
As well, it's possible, but in their request, they had also specified that some of this money would go towards travel expenses, and they justified that because they are providing services. They have to travel from there to here.
A lesser amount, 250,
I think.
500 is fine.
500?
Mhm.
Okay, half done. South Shore Summer Theater,
It's $1,000 now.
So
This is in the Mahone Bay Center, right? They're using.
is this at the center or is it?
that's the new group, is it?
Yes. They
I want
did-
to support it, but 2,000 seems like a lot, and the eventual show, I mean, it's involving young people who are residents, who might be residents of Mahone, maybe not solely, but it's a recreation program, cultural program in the town. Their final show last year was actually in Liverpool.
And the Capitol Theater, they
Right.
did one show.
Great, so, then I want to support it, I think it's a great program, so.
500?
1,000?
2,000.
$1,000.
Okay,
Note for next year, apply for twice as much.
and then we have 4 zeros. And grants, late requesting grants, we've got nominally $2,000 down there to consider.
So I do want to verify if everyone's good with leaving 2,000 there, just so.
Yeah.
In case we get something.
So,
Oh, no.
no, please.
And in that case, you don't have to come to us to approve it.
I mean, unless for some reason the thing that's being requested is something I wouldn't approve, I guess. But, yeah. Normally those requests are sporting related, they're like, we have a group of town going off to a show or, or to a competition.
As long as one person doesn't request a full 2,000.
Yeah.
What about the annual Mahone Bay Town Council Citizens Party? Are you gonna-
I just want to confirm for the Legion Remembrance Day, we've settled on 0, and then we will, as a
If
council.
they, yeah,
Okay, perfect.
Did we
Yeah.
say, didn't we say 200? No?
Well, we have
We just said we let them
Have to
ask.
wait
We've done
till-
2,000.
Oh, we want to
we normally participate with Remembrance Day luncheon,
Yeah.
with the New Year's Day levy. We can contribute to that is another one,
Mhm.
right? So, okay, what's our total?
Our total is. drum
What's our
roll,
total, Johnny?
please.
20.
So it's, wait a minute, sorry.
That sounds like a good number.
Right? Hold on, sorry, I don't have a mouse, and as you all know now, I'm not that good. So is 16,036 and then 2,000 on top of that, so 18,036.
Okay. And the Mahone Bay Center Society and the Athletic and Cultural Trust
On top of that,
is a separate
correct.
piece.
That's the Rebecca Fisk.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yes.
All right. So we're okay with that?
Yeah.
Let's move on to subsidies.
So now the question just on the grants becomes, can we tell people, the
Yes.
budget's not approved, but the amounts aren't gonna change unless someone feels they will, so can we tell people now?
Would you like a motion for preliminary?
That would be great, then we can start cutting checks out.
Move that we release the decisions around the grants to
Okay.
the recipients.
Seconded by the deputy mayor. On the question, all in favor?
Mhm.
Motion's carried. Thank you. let's go to subsidies.
So really the subsidies here, like this is, and we present, it's the next page.
115.
We only present this here as a summary, and I think we'll have to look in future years, maybe we'll move away from providing this, as actually does an increasingly good job of retitling, moving things around. Council has a lot of conversation, we're reviewing the operating about like, just wanting people to be able to understand what we're doing. So the reason we used to do the subsidies sheet is, these are all in the operating budget. This is not an extra item. This was just trying to show that these are things that we're paying to third parties that are similar to grants, but that do not require annual reapproval through the grants process. So these are all in the budget. If anyone has any questions, we can take them here, but
They don't require approval year after year?
only in the motion to approve the budget that contains them. So there's a new one, and then we want to highlight the new one. There's a new one here, but I'm just saying, when we looked at the operating detail 2 weeks ago, we already went through all of these where they belong within the operating budget, and this is just a summary of.
So it would be where we would ask for to replace things or do whatever with them.
Sure, can you say that next?
The Mahone Bay United Soccer Association, I'm not in favor of the.
Oh, yeah, so as far as that goes, like right now, this 18 that's presented here, we're not asking for early approval or anything, so the budget itself, the whole budget includes that. If somebody wanted to suggest that we don't do that, now would be a good opportunity to suggest that, but we're not looking for a confirmation of it now, or at least I'm not. It would just be in the final overall budget. We've already talked about it once 3
Well,
weeks ago.
but wouldn't, if there's a suggestion that something not be included,
Then that's appropriate to do now.
this is, okay, but didn't you have a comment
The
about
question
the
about
senior
senior
center?
safety has been answered. Thank you very much.
Is it staying here? Or is it going into another budget?
Is it shown somewhere else in the
This
budget?
isn't-
Yeah, it appears like
This-
projected services.
This is a
the
summary, yeah.
It's just an item.
So in relation to that question, sort of, I'd suggest that the title of this little summary be changed a little bit to reflect the fact that this information is included elsewhere in the budget. So this is just a summary of items elsewhere in the
Yeah, sure.
budget, because I think it's useful having it here. But the way it's presented right now makes it appear that it's
Is it
separate.
incremental?
Yeah, so
You just put a note on. say-
Yeah, just put a note on the
Please,
title and say,
Do that right now.
thank you.
Councillor Wilson,
I'm concerned about, I'm not concerned about the $18,000 amount from Mahone Bay United. But I'm concerned about the notion that we would be paying that sort of a subsidy to a group that has no user fees. Where all of the other recreational elements I'm aware of, like the ball field, the swimming pool, the tennis club, etc., all are in large part self-funded by the users. And I know it's a great marketing shtick, and it's a nice idea, but I fundamentally disagree with it.
Just 2 points on Councilor Wilson's note. I thought the arrangement was between, the official arrangement was between the town and the Mahone Bay Center, not the club. Is the contract, is the letter last night from the center or to the club?
So the contract's a three-way agreement, but the way this payment was structured, and it's not in the contract, but the way we had structured it, the way the two of them said that they would like it structured, was that this payment would go to Mahone Bay United, and they would pay Mahone Bay Center with respect to the services that Mahone Bay Center
Okay,
might provide to the field. So,
so,
you know, in terms of washrooms and bookings and what, that's between them. So we would pay Mahone Bay United and they would pay the center.
so I think to Councilor Wilson's point, like we requested the budget to kind of speak to this issue, contextualize the issue, about 18,000 as a percentage of what number? Like, that's the whole reason why Councilor now made the motion to ask for the budget, which we received from Mr. Marriott, I believe, and I think the total context is they have more like a $32,000 or $33,000 budget, of which this is 18%, 18,000 of that, 32 or 33, if I'm going by memory. So I think that's a point around the storytelling, Councilor Wilson, I agree. Is there a way for us to illustrate that this is like what percentage, because even in the swimming pool, like this is a relatively small portion of the overall pool budget. Like I think the pool budget, which I don't have on the top of my head, is several times bigger than, this is maybe 30% of the pool budget. Relative to their other funding sources.
And the users also contribute to the cost of operating the pool.
Like, we're not paying for 100% of the pool, I think, is to Council Wilson's point.
Yeah.
Nor are we paying 100% of the cost of running the club. There's lots of other funders as well. We're only one, we're an important funder, maybe we're even the biggest funder, but we're not the only funder of the group.
Well, just to put that into perspective, the actual budget is 65,000, so this represents about 30%.
A third, yeah, I bet you the pool number is similar to that.
But with 200 plus people registered in the programs, it would be a relatively small user fee in comparison. That would ease the stress on the club to provide the services that they're gonna provide. At $60,000 budget.
I guess the percentage of the overall funding would be a helpful statistic to record somewhere.
Yeah.
As we do it in the capital, we show program funding, third-party funding, our funding, and we can kind of see the relative ratios. That might be helpful.
But this might even be as simple as amending the letter that we're sending to encourage within the pilot, the 3-year period, that they do become more revenue supporting without attaching an actual requirement. I mean, it's a new thing. So we can look at this as a pilot.
Yeah, so,
I'm sorry, Councillor Carver.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Now.
Well, I just want to speak on that. This request for the arrangement to operate and run and the sports field
Yeah.
originated with the Mahone Bay Center and the Mahone Bay United people. And they said at that time that they were gonna maintain the field. And if I recall correctly, I think the statement at that time was made that it wouldn't cost the taxpayers anything. Here we are. I don't, if they're gonna maintain the field and that is part of the arrangement, then I don't think that the taxpayers should be paying the amount for it. I mean, we're paying the full cost of maintenance on that field with $18,000. And I just don't agree with that. I think that if this leaves them a little shorthanded on their budget, they'd have to do the same as any other organization or any other, we have to do. If we're short, we try to cut elsewhere or use our fees or raise money some other way. So I can't support putting taxpayers' monies into it. So
I do recall a statement when we first heard of the opportunity to get federal funding to build the field or to improve the field, that it would not cost the town any money for this project. Now, the realities of time, obviously.
Can I just add one tiny clarifying detail for that point, just so I know we've got other people in the queue?
Yep.
So we had talked initially about at the minimum, the town would have some savings. And that the net of that would not result in any additional cost to the town. But I think from the very beginning, there has been an understanding that if we spend $5,000 less a year on maintenance, if we provided that amount, it would be a net neutral with the public still have use of it. This isn't becoming a private thing. So the difference has become the difference between what we spend and what Mahone Bay United purports to spend. But I just wanted to clarify, like, we would actively already spend up to about $5,000 to maintain the field that we'd be saving. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Not 18,000.
Councillor Carver.
so, 2 things. I'm confused now. I thought we had approved already that contract, that agreement of 18,000. Have we
it
not?
didn't actually
No.
amend the
The
contract.
contract is.
Oh, there was no
approved
mention of contract. Okay. So
We
my second,
specifically removed money.
right, thank you. So the second thing is that to think about other organizations who have a similar value of ensuring accessibility to everybody to participate. And so they use a pay what you can kind of strategy or donations welcome kind of strategy. So that goes along with what was said earlier, the idea of encouraging the organization to develop that more financial sustainability, self-sustainability. not relying on the grants. Anyway, that's my thoughts there.
Thank you. Council or Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so I think we are confusing so many things in the same conversation. And I hope that what I'm saying can be slightly clear. So philosophically, what a society does, it's based on what their goals are. So the goals of the Mahombe United is to make soccer accessible to everyone. And that means removing all barriers. And we've been able to do that without the town coming in to do so. What's happened in this situation is that there was an opportunity to apply for funding to improve the field that continues to be property of the town of Mahombe. It's not becoming property of the town, property of Mahombe United. And so, just like the CEO says, there would be increasing ongoing costs for that. Now, the challenge for us is that with that increased, better standard of a field, the cost of maintaining it are higher than would have been anticipated. And so, in many ways, it feels as if this money is going to Mahombe Center just for and Mahombe United just for our programming, but it's not. It's going to the value of the community as a whole. The standards of that field are going up. Now, I know it's quite a lot of money. I do not disagree on that, but just in context, the swimming pool gets 26,000 annually, right? In this budget.
15, I think.
Now, if we go to, I think it's page. If you go to recreation, trying to figure out which page that is. Recreation and cultural services.
52?
Yeah, page 52. We're giving 26,500 to swimming pool operations, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So there has to be context in terms of. I understand maybe the numbers do not feel like they're where they should be. We've shown clearly that the lack of the opportunity actually reduced the amount of people using the field. Now we've shown that within a span of 4 years, we went from 15 kids playing soccer in Mahombe regularly to now we have over 250. So I see this as an investment, and it's a 3-year pilot. If after those 3 years you feel, oh, we're putting money into this and it's not very helpful, probably for sure. I will guarantee you the 3 years will show that this is a service that the town and the region needs as a whole, and you're making an investment in that. Now, we do not have, I think there's a question there around sustainability issues. We do not have sustainability issue. If we didn't have this funding from the town, we would still offer our pre-programming. That would still happen. Even last year when we didn't have this, we still use the field and of our programming. This is just that the field has come to a better standard to be used by the community as a whole, and that's why that will comes to it.
Councillor Kerr.
Oh, I support everything and agree with everything that the deputy mayor has said. My earlier comments were simply about the concern about donating taxpayer money to an organization that isn't comparable to the Pool Society, for example, or the pool where fees are charged. So, I mean, it's not a big deal for me. And so partly, is it optics? I'm thinking about optics. I'd be, for some reason, I feel more comfortable with 15,000 to 18,000. It's sort of petty, but I do. No, I mean, I support providing money for the soccer association. I think we do need to support the recreation. And the fact is that more people than simply the soccer association are actively using the field now. I mean, before it was fenced off, the number of kids and people who were using the walking track, the track, just from the community.
Golfers out there.
Yeah, I mean, that was a significant change in terms of the use by the community, as opposed to the soccer association. So I do see it as an investment in the community. Definitely, not just a further.
Your worship, if I may, just to put it in context, and I don't disagree with the deputy mayor. that the swimming pool, in addition to the 20 some odd $1,000, is getting probably in the next 2 years, $500,000 swimming pool. So it's not like we're not contributing in other areas, but I guess I just have a fundamental philosophical disagreement about the user fee business, especially when you consider that probably 80% of the kids are coming from outside the town itself.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Deputy Mayor?
so and I do understand that philosophical challenge getting around user fees. I believe that's a very, from my perspective, a very North American approach to sports in general. And not just sports, but physical activity for children, in the sense that it is seen, like maybe this is I will take hockey as sort of seems to be the one that drives the bus when it comes to thinking about sports and physical activity. North America is the only place I've lived, and slightly little bit in the UK, whereby you actually pay to play the game. In most games, the reason why soccer and football is so popular around the world and is played all over the world is because in most places you don't pay to play, you actually get paid to play. So we in many ways are trying to change that culture, because if you think about it, 20 years ago, the soccer culture here was very strong. We had lots of teams. There was a lot of soccer being played. That has gone down, and we believe one part around that is the barriers that have been introduced, and predominantly cost barriers. So we're trying to change that model, and I think if town council supports that, down the road you'll get significant benefits from you having been part of the solution, in my perspective. So I understand the philosophical perspective, but it's important to think about it from a what are we trying to do, big picture kind of thing.
Okay. Councillor Lawrence Crowe.
I just want to know, is Bayview School going to be using the soccer field? Their soccer field has never been a good field from the day it was built.
Yeah.
There have been more injuries on that field. If you're in goal on one end, you can't see the other end of the field. I coached on that field. I had children play on that field. I was home and school president when that was, it was all pointed out at the very start, I think having a safe field here in Mahone Bay that will hopefully be used. I know Bayview often walk down there after school for practices before it was finished off like it is today. I really think it will be an asset to the community as a whole. We offer very little in recreation in Mahone Bay. I'm glad to see that walking trail, that track for people, and I don't think that's publicized enough. Hopefully we'll do a better job publicizing it, but I think a 3-year pilot project, I think it's a good investment for us to see how it's going to be utilized and how it's going to be accepted by the community.
Councillor Bean.
Finally, we've talked about this a lot, but I don't disagree with Councillor Now's timelines. The original arrangement has changed and evolved, and from the moment we had the initial conversation and now we have a much different arrangement. But we also have made other decisions that we talked about last night at the land use bylaw and the rezoning of the field to recreational. So there's a number of linkages here to the permanent use of that space by the community for recreation, and that's where we're heading. If there's a lack of support around the table for the land use bylaw change, there are moments of time to declare. I just hope anybody who won't support the change of use is going to declare soon enough for us to have a reasonable conversation, because we're going to look like we're at a loggerheads about we're investing a lot of money in an asset that if it doesn't dovetail with the change of use, it does make a lot of sense to me. So, I think beyond this year's $18,000 appropriation, I view this as this is a 3-year program. Essentially, by moving forward with the agreement, we've agreed to fund some modest capital investment this year in the form of the Roomba mower or the mower drone, whatever our vernacular is, coupled with 3 years of stable funding. We're also funding barriers and pylons and things to make sure that so we have other tangential investments as well. And more importantly, beyond all of that money is the land use change, the change of the land use bylaw. So these things all stitch together in a new community asset that we didn't have 5 years ago, we have now, new zoning and investments in the quality of the feed. And so we're not just approving one thing, we're approving all of these things, or we're approving none of these things. Because if we don't approve the money, we don't approve the new fence, then it's illogical to approve the change of zoning. That's just one opinion, but so in my opinion, you're either all in or you're not in at all. And I think after hearing the response last evening, I think there is a lot of community support for the reality on the ground, which is everybody's okay with having that rezoning occur.
Can I just?
Go ahead.
So just in respect of it's important to link these things, and I totally agree with you. I mean, we try to split them out because it's appropriate to do so, but they can't really be seen in isolation. And, leaving the zoning aside, the bigger consideration that I would have about this is I think I've been very clear. Mahone Bay Center and Mahone Bay United are not accepting an agreement except in association with the funding they've requested. So if we don't come through with the 18,000, they will have to decide, but I think reasonably probably would decide that they couldn't take on this management. And it is worth something to the town, I think, that they do. So, saying, well, we'll take the agreement, you guys take all these obligations, we're not gonna get any money. They don't have to accept that, and I don't know why they would. So I just want to make that clear. We have delinked the two things. They are not actually delinked in the way the field would be operated.
But that's their choice.
Sure, but there's a consequence to the town in the agreement not going forward.
Can you quantify that?
Yes, we would have to operate, we do the maintenance, we do the bookings, that would be a staff cost on both ends, insurance, liability. To put a price on it, we're probably talking at least $10,000 a year all told.
But if we operated the field the way it had been operated, which had, most of that didn't exist.
Yeah, so if we don't take bookings on the field and allow it to be just a field, we used to just say it was a field, it wasn't a sporting location. And it's mowed to keep it from going wild.
Yeah.
The cost per year would only be about $3,000 to the town. Yeah. But we've done a lot of improvement that doesn't
Deputy Mayor,
drive.
who's
it.
the first in the council will-
Yeah, so I think. I don't like doing this, but let's just see who's for this and who's not, because we will go round and round.
We'll get to that, but as you said earlier, you do have a conflict of interest in this situation, so Councillor Wilson.
I just want to make it clear, I'm in favor of spending the $18,000. I will vote for that. I just have a asterisk beside it saying their approach to it, the whole funding situation that irritates.
And that $18,000 is per year for 3 years. Is that right, Mr. Hyde?
Yeah,
This year's budget, though, is it not?
No.
So are we committing to the full 3 years?
Yes.
So the agreement is a 3-year agreement.
Yeah.
And we're only committing once a year to funding, but if we're committing to a 3-year agreement, there's a notional understanding that we're committing to 3 years of funding.
So does MBU, MBC have to come back in next year's budget process for the 18,000 again, or does the 3-year agreement give them tacit approval each year for the 18,000?
So because we took it out of the agreement, it would have been in the agreement, it would have been there with the approval. So the approval would now be in the form of a letter that would be written by the town. So we have discussed that. So eventually, if the town does send that letter and the letter commits us to 3 years of funding, that would be the commitment.
Okay,
And future councils would have to look at that letter, and if for some reason they said, let's tear this up, well, that would be a problem to be dealt with by future councils, I think, because 3 years does take us into the next council.
Deputy Mayor, you want to make your motion?
Well,
It's
it's in the budget.
It's in the budget.
It's already
It's
approved.
just a
He just wants
budget.
to find out who's favor, who's not. Is that also-
It's just,
This is just a summary.
Yeah,
it's just a sign. If the budget approves it, it'll remain part of the budget unless there's a motion. to
Somebody can
remove
make a
it.
motion to remove.
You have to make a motion and remove it.
As Counselor now suggests, if you're unhappy with one element in the budget, you have to make your presence known by.
Emotion.
Voting.
You reject the whole budget.
You can
No,
move
you
to
can-
remove it, or you can move to not approve the budget.
Yeah.
Those are the two paths, as I understand it.
Or change the allocation.
Yeah, or move to change the allocation. I mean, you have to make a motion to change what's there or vote against the whole thing,
Yeah.
but those are both options, yeah.
Deputy Mayor, did you want to make a motion?
No.
No.
Anyone else
No.
want to make a motion?
No. I would make a motion to remove it, but I don't think I'm gonna have the support even for a second or
Well,
something.
wait a-
I will make that motion.
To remove it completely?
Yeah.
Do we have a seconder?
Well, I'll second it just to get it on the, to be
Thank you,
addressed.
Councilor Carver. Motion to remove the field item, the $18,000 from. Okay, on the question. All in favor?
Your hand up?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it's hard to tell sometimes.
Sorry. No, you're right, Councilor Carver, and I've thought about that. Okay, that's for the motion. Opposed? Okay, the item stays in the budget. Let's go to, where are we at here?
So, thanks everyone. So that was the end of the open session discussion and, I mean, we went over, I didn't actually anticipate the subsidies conversation even happening, let alone taking the half hour, but. I'm not suggesting we go to closed session for personnel. That can happen at the next meeting. We'll do utilities, operating capital, personnel, if everybody's comfortable with that at the next meeting. But I would like, I think, very little time to talk about this one contract matter, like 5-10 minutes. I really, I know I could be guilty of guessing wrong how long it will take. I really don't think it will take time.
When is the next meeting?
That was what I was asking. So yeah, the next meeting we've talked about was next Thursday morning at 9.
Yeah.
I guess everybody's still
That's the
comfortable, so
18th?
that Kelly could notice.
May 18th. Okay, we'll now entertain a motion to go in camera.
So
We have a seconder, Councilor Carver, all in favor? Thank you. Tone of silence is on.
I just wanted to verify that there are no questions from.
Yeah, before we shut down.
Is there anybody out there?
There's 7 and there are no questions.
No questions?
That's good now.